room, you can't move, you can't speak. It's a horrible, horrible feeling.
You know, you're looking out into the darkness and then you see a figure, but it's darker than the darkness.
I just get this like really creepy feeling, and I see this like shadowy, demon-looking figure in the front seat of the car.
She used to come into my room at night and stand right by my bed, and I just was petrified.
I remember I saw something fly by my bedroom window. We heard the bathroom door shut. So then we looked out my bedroom window down the hallway, and the bathroom door was wide open.
So we came around the bend and we saw eye shine. This thing stood up. I mean, it stood up. And it had high pointed ears. It had a snout, had a long arm, and it grabbed the deer.
Okay, guys, very excited to welcome our next guest to Let's Get Freaky. We have got Vicki Joy with us tonight. How are you?
I am doing awesome. I'm so happy to be here, and I thank you for the invite.
I'm excited to have you here. What part of the US are you in?
I am in the Ozarks. It's beautiful down here.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
Lovely.
And talk about getting freaky. It's
Yeah.
a little weird. It can get a little weird down here too.
Well, Ozark, the TV show Ozark on Netflix. I didn't know a lot about Ozark before that show, and I wanted to move there straight away. I was like, that looks like the coolest place.
It is. It's absolutely beautiful. And I spent most of my life in Minnesota, where it is cold a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it was like December 30th, and I was out in a hoodie. I couldn't even believe it. So I'm loving the weather.
Yeah, that's cool. You've got all those like the cool like lakes and stuff, and everyone's got a boat.
Yep.
I want to
Beautiful
go
lakes
there.
down here.
Yeah.
Well, you're welcome to come. You got an open invitation.
Oh, well, I'm coming. Awesome. Now you've got quite a lot of Sasquatch activity there in the Ozarks as well, haven't you?
Yes. Oh yeah. You'll find a lot of that fodder in the gift shops and stuff when you get down here. But yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Love that. I'm definitely going to take you up on that invite.
Cool.
I've got a bit of a joke. That's why I'm doing this show, is so I can, meet enough people in America and I can travel America one day and just stay on everyone's couches.
All right. Well, you better hurry before the whole place implodes.
I know. I haven't got long. I think that's the whole world. The whole world's going crazy at the moment.
Yeah. But it's the countdown since 2020, man.
Yes. Yeah. And it just seems to be getting stranger and stranger as time goes on. We'll see what 2024 has to bring. Hopefully it's a little better.
Yeah, amen to that, I tell you. But on the same token, though, what an exciting time to be alive. I mean, for real. I mean, we could have been alive in the Black Plague or something. This is what we got. But there's so much disclosure going on now. Stuff that our grandparents and our great grandparents longed to look into this stuff, and we're actually getting answers. And so, from that standpoint, I think we are living in such a cool time.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's in some cases the world's mad, but in others, like the fact that we can do this and we can have these conversations and listen to podcasts where you can talk about anything, that for now anyway, that's pretty cool. So
absolutely,
we're getting a lot more information out there, which is what we like.
Yeah. I always like to say, it's interesting how whenever we hear about like the hive mind or like the collective or the Borg, we think, dystopian, and we think the elites are in control and they're going to use it to mind control us. But it works both ways, dude. Like we've got a hive mind going on here on the internet too, which is why they're trying so hard to stop it and to censor it. And I don't know if they really, maybe that was one of those laws of unintended consequences. When you get a whole bunch of people together, we don't always just get together and fight and bicker. Sometimes we share information, and there's been a lot of red pills over the last 5-10 years. And so, anytime the elites or the bad guys or whoever you want to call them have some sort of technology or some sort of agenda that they're going to introduce to the world for their own purposes, we have the ability to harness those things for our own purposes as well. So thank you very much for the hive mind, because it's really
Yeah.
helped wake a lot of people up.
Yeah, for sure. Because I'm a conspiracy theorist, that's for sure. I don't trust any government or I don't trust anything. But I do feel like we give them a lot of I feel like would if if they was as powerful as we sometimes give them credit, would we be able to have these conversations now? I mean, surely they'd have wiped it out years ago. So
Yeah.
I don't think they're
I
as powerful as we sometimes say, give them credit for.
I I am so glad you said that, because I'm having to say this a lot. And, I travel in a lot of Christian and evangelical circles, and I am constantly having to tell people, if you're going to believe that God is the most powerful being in the universe, but you think everything going on right now is the devil, like, what sort of glory are you giving to the other side here? And I look at it like a Wizard of Oz kind of a thing. In the end, the Wizard of Oz was a guy behind a curtain with some
Yes.
technology.
Yeah.
And so it's all smoke and mirrors. And I think whether you're talking about the elites or the powerful or the rich or the Illuminati or the demon world, whatever, much of their power, yes, they do have some, but I think much of it is smoke and mirrors. They have managed to convince us. It's the proverbial cartoon where the guy sees the shadow of the huge roaring lion on the brick wall, and then he turns around and it's a little cat that goes meow. And
Yes.
I think that's what's going on here. Is we have been taught, even in the church, that, oh, Satan and his minions and a third of the angels fell, and they have all this power, and they, blah blah blah. And it's like, I'm not saying that they don't have any abilities or any power or any technology backing them up. Obviously, they do. We kind of have a three-dimensional world, and they've got like every facet of the diamond. They've got a lot more um, information than we do, and it's pretty easy to deceive us. But I don't think that they have near the amount of power we think they do.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Otherwise, we'd already have the chips in us. We'd already be not traveling anywhere. We'd already be contained to our homes. How we sort of see the future, possibly, hopefully not.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely,
when,
absolutely. One of the things that I think is kind of funny, if you want to see a sense of humor in God, if you want to see a little bit of where humanity gets their personality, we always get to these places in history where it looks like, okay, we're getting ready for another reset here. We're getting ready for the end of the world. We're getting ready for another world war, whatever it is. And it always gets, every time it gets a little bit closer, like, surely this has to be the end. There's no turning back. You can't stop the train at this point. This, and this is all lined up. Look at the technology, look at the laws in place. And I think that God has this sense of humor where he waits until they are absolutely to the second where they're going to push their little button,
yeah,
and then he wipes them out. It's got like the Tower of Babel kind of a thing, like, okay,
yeah,
I'll wipe your. And I just think he kind of likes to wait till the last second. So, like, every time the enemy is like, oh, we got him this time, we got it. No, foiled
yeah.
again. Oh,
It's
that's
a good
that's why
thought.
I was gonna say, that's why I always tell people, every decade I've been alive, it's been the end of the world.
Yeah,
The president of the United States is the Antichrist. There's some sickness, there's some law. There's every decade I've been alive, there's been some crisis that's going to be the end of the world. In the 80s, oh, don't use your hairspray, the ozone layer, and now it's Nibiru. and
yeah,
and what I always tell people is, what you're not accounting for is at the 11th hour, for thousands and thousands of years, they have attempted to put this new golden age into place millions of times over the last thousands and thousands. They get foiled every time. So just because now it looks like it's happening in this century, it's going to look like this next decade. It's always going to look like we're on the precipice of the end.
yeah,
And interestingly, and I don't want to stray too far off the topic if we have something in mind here, but there was a rabbi who lived in the 1800s, and his name was R. Hillel. And he was giving a definition of the end times. And, when you think of like a Christian end times, oh, the Antichrist comes and the beast and the dragon and this, Jesus comes back on the horse and all this stuff. But the end times in outside of the realms of like a religious definition.
Yeah.
The end times is always a reset. It's not the end of the world, everything blows up and it's gone. It's a global reset. And we've seen things online with like the mud floods and the timelines are off. And, we've seen things like that. And the thing that's really interesting to me about this concept of the end times is it's usually more of a concept of a reset, like the Mayan calendar. 2012 didn't mean that like Alderaan, we were going to get blown up by the Death Star. It meant there was going to be a reset. And in many ways, if we look back on 2012, there was some things going on there.
Yeah.
And so what R. Hillel said over 100 years ago, almost 130 years ago, he said that the end times will be marked by a confluence of four things: Kabbalah, Torah, science, and technology. And interestingly, one of his modern day disciples, David Joel Baxt, I think his name is, and he's a professor of Kabbalah, and he quotes R. Hillel a lot. And his website, the City of Luz, I think is his website. His tagline is Kabbalah, Torah, science, consciousness. So he's
Okay.
using technology and consciousness almost like synonyms, right?
Yeah.
And in many ways they are, because if you look at a lot of the way the tech is going, it's going towards singularity, transhumanism, it's going towards AI, it's going towards sentient AI. And really, what someone in the 1800s might have meant by technology in a Kabbalistic sense would have been an ascension of the conscience, and they're doing it through technology. But it's interesting because we see all four of these things at play right now. And that says to me that the elites are setting the stage for what they think will be a reset, but whether or not they actually are able to go through with it or not remains to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah. We've definitely got some interesting times ahead, that's for sure.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
I don't know what's coming next, but yeah, I mean, definitely with AI, AI is the future. That's for sure. I don't think there's any escaping it. I think whatever it turns out to be, it's going to be a big part in whatever the human next step is. I don't know what that's
Yeah,
going to be. I know there are people that are getting chips put in them now and stuff like that. Whatever that means, I don't know, but it's
yeah,
going to be interesting. That's for sure.
yeah. It sure is. It sure is. So, yeah, I just love talking about this kind of stuff. And for some people, they talk about this stuff and it breeds fear. And
Yeah,
but for other people, such as myself, it it breeds a lot of things. One is what I've already said. What an amazing time to be alive,
yeah,
And one thing that was really interesting is in the New Testament, when Jesus died and rose again, the disciples all believed that the end was very, very near. Like, okay, man, the Son of God just manifested and raised himself from the dead, and like we are on the precipice of him coming back. And they took all of his prophecies to be imminent, like he was going to come back, and they talked with great anticipation over the fact. Now, there was a lot of human desires wrapped up in that as well. They wanted to be freed from the tyranny of Rome. They wanted their own kingdom set up. They wanted their kingdom established. And so there was short-term and long-term and terrestrial and spiritual realm related desires in that. But what's interesting to me is the disciples who were alive in sort of the same period of time we are, this massive spiritual awakening, and this we're on the precipice of perhaps an entire reset of the world. The world was changed after Jesus came here. So we're in that place now again. And if we take the cue from people in the first century, they were excited. They were
yeah,
anticipating this with great joy. And so I really think that it's a shame that so many people, especially Christians who should be anticipating it the most, when you talk about the end, there's nothing but fear mongering and terror. And they're really actually, I'm going to use a harsh word here, hopefully to shake some people out of it. We are being absolutely hypocritical as Christians if you are going to pray the Lord's Prayer every day, which part of that is thy kingdom come, but then when it looks like his kingdom is coming, you're doing every single thing in your power to stop it. You're having prayer and fasting meetings where you're getting together and trying to stop it all. Why are you trying to stop it? Do you want it to come or don't you? And
Yeah.
so I think that there's an identity crisis there that Christians need to figure out. Do you want him to come or don't you? And if you don't want him to come, then you need to do some soul searching as to why you prefer a prosperous life here on earth instead of him coming. And maybe you're in the wrong church. Maybe your heart hasn't quite matched your doctrine yet. But if you're going to say thy kingdom come, then you better get really excited when you watch the news and you see that we're perhaps this close to it coming.
Yeah.
Pick a side.
Do you think we've all gone through, or not all of us, but a lot of us have gone through a bit of a spiritual awakening in the last few years? Because I feel like I have in a way. I feel like recent events sort of changed my thinking quite a lot and woke
Yeah,
me up to a lot of things.
I definitely think so. Um, Christianity in America, I can't speak for other places, but it has taken a massive nosedive in popularity, and even the brand of Christianity that remains still in existence is really a far cry from what would have been preached in the 70s or before. And several things, of course, reshaped America and our thinking. Obviously, 9/11 was a massive spiritual shift in and what happened, I think, at 9/11, there's always, a Achilles heel to everything that's potentially could be good. And that is in the wake of 9/11, there was a lot of coming together as Americans and being friendly to strangers, and it sort of united us in a way that maybe we hadn't been united before. And groups that were usually divided were coming together, and there was something really beautiful kind of going on in the months prior or pre after. But what it turned into now, 20 years later, is our spirituality has been replaced with patriotism. And there's nothing wrong with being patriotic about your country, but uh, a lot of even nominal churches have turned into more of humanitarian efforts than gospel preaching. And so I really think, we were already in a postmodern church age, even in the early 2000s, but we've really turned subtly to a humanitarian, social, woke gospel here. And it's more, um, when I get together with a lot of people that believe the way I do politically, or believe the conspiracies that I believe, or are ready to, fight for the Constitution and things like that. If this was 50 years ago, all those people would be like churchgoers and guys on the elder board and, family men. And now you have got patriots fighting shoulder to shoulder. You've got atheists and Christians on the same team. And it's because the spirituality here in America is slowly giving way to a nominal patriotism, more so than it is an actual sort of dogmatic or theological foundation.
I would say that's probably the same in the UK and a lot of places as well. I think the same thing's happening.
Yeah,
It's
and this is priming the pump for a one world religion. And here we've got two sides of the coin. We've got unity. Hey, let's all stop bickering and fighting over theology and all of this stuff. It's potentially a beautiful thing.
yeah.
But if it's void of the necessary attributes of true lasting peace, uh, it's ultimately going to fail, or it's going to be short lived. And we've seen so many attempts by humanity to, like, communes in the 60s, and like, we're going to create this nirvana, we're going to create this world where everyone's on the same page, and we're all going to live together, and we're going to share our wealth, and we're going and it's going to wipe away all the problems. And I think at this point we have not only exhausted our attempts to create our own world peace without any sort of divine intervention, but we're now on a cycle where just every few years we're repeating the same tactics over and over again, and it never works long term. And unfortunately, in the end times, if you go to the eschatological predictions of the future, the Antichrist is going to succeed at world peace. He's going to cure cancer. Everyone's going to be walking around saying peace, peace, safety, safety, and it is absolutely going to look like nirvana. And the bad news in that is it's very short lived, and that's why when you hear all these promises about free housing and your college loan being paid off, and you can be debt free and you don't even have to work anymore, it sounds great on paper, but when you rip humanity out of humanity, we were created to be creative and to
Yeah.
interact with one another and to work and to be innovative and to invent and to teamwork and fellowship. We were built with that in our DNA. And if you strip that all away, if you steal that from us, and we sit around all day kind of just bored trying to think of something to do, there is no way long term that
Yeah.
that is going to lead to any peace. It's like the people that think that winning the lottery is going to solve all their problems. And if you look at most people who have won the lottery, if you check in with them 5, 10 years later, their lives were destroyed by it. And so
Yeah.
the warning there is that we will see peace on earth achieved at some point, but it will be on a very shaky foundation and it will be extremely short lived.
We need the conflict, and we need all
Yeah,
that to grow. That's what makes us grow. That's what makes us build as the human race.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We don't want to admit this because we don't like it at the time, but most of us, if we look back at kind of like those bellwether moments in our life where we really grew up, or we really changed for the better, or we became better people, or we became less prideful or less self-centered, it's always some horrible tragedy that we had to really sucker ourselves
Yeah.
through. It's the loss of a loved one or a miscarriage or a divorce, or it's usually those times of suffering that really put our nose to the ground and make us really think, okay, what is this all about? And
Yeah.
why did I put all of my eggs in this one basket? I was relying on, I'm going to be happy if I achieve this, this, and this. And when we start looking for our achievements to be our happiness, those are all things that can be taken away from us in an instant. An economy can crash, a spouse can leave or die. And so we really have to root our our happiness and our ability to sustain ourselves and enjoy life and be a fruitful member of society. We really have to root ourselves into something that is absolutely unshakable. And if anything we've learned since 2020, everything is up for grabs on
Yeah.
this planet.
For sure. For sure.
Mm,
That's the thing. I mean, for me, 2020 personally was a big eye opener and changed
mm,
me. I would say it's funny because I would say it changed me and probably made me a better person because it made me realize that I haven't got tomorrow. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. So whatever you want to do it now, right now.
yeah,
Don't wait for tomorrow. So that's it actually had a good impact on me, even though it was a terrible time for all of
it
us.
was. It was. That I think the two biggest changes that came for me is, first of all, I lost my innocence in one area. I really thought that when it really comes down to it, the average human being is so instinctive in self-survival that when the crap really hit the fan, we would see people defending their own survival. And it shocked me how many people, because of fear of man, uh, could not stand up to this agenda. It shocked me. I really had a lot more faith in the will and the warrior spirit of humanity. And I couldn't believe how many people were selling their lives and their souls and their families down the river because they were afraid that they might have to get another job or they might not be able to go to the concert, next month. And that
Yeah.
that shocked me. That really disheartened me, and that kind of threw me for a loop. But what it did for me personally is, I've been one of these people my whole life. When you grow up in church and you hear all these stories about like David and Goliath and the walls of Jericho falling, like you really learn from a young age to kind of have this like fight the man kind of a system, like with God all things are possible. You can't stand up to me. I'm not bowing to your statue, Nebuchadnezzar. And like, that's the way we're kind of raised. And what 2020 did for me and for a lot of people is you never really know what you're going to do in a situation until you're in that situation. You can talk tough. I've heard so many people, if I won the lottery, I'd give it all to charity. And then they win the lottery and it's like they're
Yeah.
pulling up in their Ferrari, right?
Yeah.
So you never know. You never really know what you're made of until it's tested. And I've been one of these people my whole life that like, give me liberty or give me death. I mean, we were raised in this country to hear all the stories about the Revolutionary War and all of these heroes. And we're really hero centric here in America. I don't know if that's something with everybody, but you just look at the movies that we're churning out. It's all these superheroes and saving the planet, saving the world, fighting for mankind. And so that's really built into the spirit of Americans. And when 2020 hit and it was like, okay, nobody knew. Are you going to go to prison if you don't do this? Or are you not going to be able to get groceries? Are you going to lose your job? And I had a few lines I absolutely wasn't going to cross because I thought I'm not going to cower to a lie.
Yeah.
And I realized in 2020 that I had an opportunity to put my money where my mouth was, and my talk isn't cheap. And when it comes to tyrants, I'm going to stand up, even if it means being jailed or losing something valuable to me. And I just think that we've got to. This is something that's really also hit home for me in 2020. There are a bunch of verses. I'm thinking especially in Romans, and there's one in First Peter. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that talk about submitting to the governing authorities. And there were a lot of Christians in 2020 that were going with the flow because they believed, because of their teaching that they had received in their church, the seminary approved teaching was no matter what your government says, you obey them. And even if you're persecuted for it, and even if you suffer for it, you're going to be honored because you obeyed. This is where that is faulty theology. If you actually read those verses in context, it says that the reason we submit to our governing authorities is because they were appointed by God to uphold moral and ethical law. They were there to protect people from tyranny. And so if you go against them, you're part of the tyranny. And so the reason why we subject ourselves to the governing authorities is because they were put in place to protect the system, morals, ethics, the law. And so nowhere in scripture does it say that when that government has been torn to the ground and taken over, and that rogues have come into the places of power and taken over, and they're ruling with an iron fist and tyranny, and they're breaking the law in order to rule you, that you have to obey them. There is nothing in scripture backing that up. That is the place, that's the part where
Yeah.
you rise up and you fight and you defend morals and ethics and standards and laws. And so I think that that's a big area where really decades of bad preaching really reared its head in 2020 when you started to see how ill-equipped people of faith were to recognize the times that they were in and to courageously stand up against it. And I kept talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in 2020, where they were in Babylon, which was a pretty nasty place. You did not mess with the king of Babylon. You just didn't. And they refused to bow down to that golden statue, and they were thrown in a fiery furnace. They were going to be martyred. They were going to die because they wouldn't do that. And I love the line right as they're about to be thrown into the furnace. They say, "Oh, great king," they're talking to the king of Babylon. "Oh, great king, um, our God is able to save us from your fiery furnace." And then this is the part I love. They said, "But if he doesn't, we still won't bow." I love that. That is like the spirit of
Yeah.
an American right there.
Yeah, that's cool.
Like I know that God could swoop down here right now and slit your throat. He could make me invisible. He could send a legion of angels to come and say, I know my God can do that. But if he doesn't, you can take your statue and shove it where the sun doesn't shine because I'm still not bowing down.
Yeah.
And I love that. And
Yeah.
that's the kind of heroism that we have lost hold of. And it doesn't mean we can't grab back hold of it again. And unfortunately, if history is a lesson for us, probably what is going to bring humanity back to a place where they have a fighting spirit, it will probably come through persecution because it usually does.
Yeah.
So we might have to learn the hard way. If we're not going to learn the easy way, we might have to learn the hard way. But I certainly don't think it necessarily has to be the end. But another thing that I tell my friends all the time is the end of America is not synonymous with the end of the world. And just because your prosperity or your life of ease or your privileges go away, or just because God removes his favor from this country and we're not like number one anymore, he can do the same thing to us that happened to Rome, that happened to Mongolia, that happened to Egypt. We can be a faded epitaph on a tombstone of history. 300 years from now, people will be talking about the great state of America the same way they talked about the Roman Empire and the Mongolian Empire and the American Empire. We could just be smeared ink on a page of history. And if God wants to, this can keep going for 100 more years, 100,000 more years. And so I think another thing that sort of distresses me, because again, I think it shows fear and it shows how rooted we are in this world and this life, is that if things are going to get difficult for America, then Jesus is going to have to come and save us because we're not going to be persecuted. Everybody else in all of history has been persecuted. They've been put into slavery. They've starved to death. They've been abused. They've been murdered. They've been martyred. And so this whole idea that God is not going to let a toenail of an American, be broken before he swoops in to save them. It's unrealistic thinking and it's not congruent with any of scripture.
And going back to what we were saying at the start, I don't think these people have got these powers that be have got as much power as they like us to think that they've got, because
Yeah,
they would have took us down
yeah,
if that was the
yeah,
case. Then they
yeah.
would have,
Well,
we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now.
yeah. Well, and you know what's really scary, Tommy? They have as much power as we give them.
Yeah, no,
We
yeah, for
we
sure.
we gave them so much power
Yeah,
in 2020 and it bit us in the butt in 2021 and it got worse. And the fact is, if even 5% of the people had stood up and said, no way, this all would have failed. We are this far down the track because people gave them that power, because they were afraid of the unknown. They listened to the threats that were just empty threats. No one was going to go to prison because they don't wear a mask. But everybody believed it. And then
yeah.
that gave them the power to enforce it. Because if you believe that they can legally do that, when they do it, you don't fight it. So I am appalled at how history just continues to repeat itself. I remember as a kid when I first learned about World War II and everything that was going on over there. My grandpa fought in World War II. He did 28 bombing missions over Germany. He was a navigator. And my uncle is a refugee from Latvia. He escaped Latvia post World War II, and
Wow.
his father defected from the army and came over here, not even being able to speak English. And so, um, I have people in my life in my lifetime who went through World War II and they saw the decline and they're seeing the signs of it happening over again. And I remember just asking my uncle and my grandpa, like, well, there was millions of these Jews. Why didn't they just take up arms and like what? I couldn't believe that with all those people, they didn't just defend themselves. And lo and behold, here I have lived to see history repeat itself, where millions and millions of people just like folded. They just rolled over. And
Yeah.
I think there's a reason why um, the Bible talks so much about fear of man being a sin. And when I was a kid, I thought fear of man, I thought all that was when you're in peer pressure and your friends are telling you to like drink or smoke pot and fear of man, like that's all I thought it was. And now as I'm older, I realize that if we start making decisions based upon a fear of another man and what he can do to us, we have already fallen to their grip. We're already in their power.
Yeah.
And it fearlessness and courage, we've got to make courage like in vogue again,
Yeah.
and here in America, they are very intentionally teaching young people, they're not teaching young people courage. If you're scared, if you're anxious, if you're afraid, if you're offended, if you're depressed, here's a nice, easy way to avoid it. You can take this medication, or here's a little safe room, or you can complain to the authorities and these people will be taken away. And that's great. You don't ever have to come face to face with something that makes you uncomfortable. But unfortunately, you will never learn courage. And we need that for survival.
Yeah. 100%. I would like to think that if 2020 was to happen again, I know we're not too far away from it, but if it
Yeah.
was to, I'd like to think that now more people would stand up and say, no, actually, this is wrong. That doesn't make sense. What you're doing is doing a lot more harm than good. We're not having it. I would like to
Yeah.
think more people would now. I don't know. I
I
mean,
I would too, but I don't know. I'm curious what you think about this, Tommy. I think that they have tried twice to do
yep,
it again. Remember
yes,
the Delta variant and the monkeypox?
yep, yeah, yeah,
They both
yeah,
they both disappeared fairly quickly. And
yeah,
I think that people were like, it was after like a year and a half or 2 years of like lockdowns and quarantines and all that. And I think they did it too soon and people were like, I would rather have monkeypox than go through that
yeah,
again. I don't even
exactly.
care.
Yeah, yeah, that's it though. It gets to the point where, you know, obviously if everything they're saying is true, it's scary. But what's more important? Like life is, it's not about being stuck at home and not working, and it's about, I think people just, as you said, thought, no, I'm not having that again. I'd rather get ill than go through that again. I think
Yeah.
it's, yeah, for sure, for sure. I
Yeah.
I do think they've tried it since. I do think they'll probably try it again, but
Oh
it
yeah.
it does seem, hopefully, that more people, even having conversations like this, more people are fighting back.
Yeah, I think so. I think, we were talking a little bit earlier about have people undergone a spiritual awakening. And I think since 2020, a lot of people, at least here in America, there's a lot of people I know whose heads are so far out of the sand now, by
Yeah,
way of knowing that this is all rigged. And, you know, I I remember because I used to read a lot about the presidents when I was a kid because I was so intrigued by all these sort of like um, coincidences and synchronicities between they were related and they both died on the same day and like all
yeah,
the numerology. And so before I was awake, I was like, whoa, that's so cool. What are the chances? But if you actually go now and read like presidential history, this stuff was rigged from day one. And there's so much misinformation. And um, there were presidents before George Washington. We had a black president before George Washington. So all this like first black president, it's a lie. It's all just again, America, we want a hero. We love the underdogs. We want underdogs and we want heroes. And I think that's why Obama succeeded. I think that's why Trump succeeded. They were the ones that weren't supposed to win. Hillary was supposed to win. And we Americans, we love the underdogs and we love to see the underdogs prevail. And then when the underdogs prevail and they rise to the level of being elite and they're better than us, then we love to see them fail and we love to see them twisted and messed up. And you
yeah,
you can see that in the way we treat our celebrities. We love these underdog celebrities, but then when they get too famous and too rich and all
Yeah.
of a sudden they're shaving their head or they're going crazy, then we just love it. And we got to
Yeah.
watch all
Yeah.
these videos. So we're really just like some brute humans are brutal people.
Yeah,
but
for sure. Yeah.
but there's just so much ridiculousness in the political system, and this idea that it's been corrupt, since in the last 20 years. It's ridiculous. It's always been corrupt. I mean, you can go back into elections like the FDR election, and I so many of these elections that were purchased and paid for by the big billionaire families, and they've always run it. They probably always will.
Yeah.
um, but I am seeing a lot of people wake up, and I'm seeing a lot of people out here realizing that this isn't the perfect little country that they always thought that it was. And um, I'm not one of these people like, yeah, let's get it back. Let's get it back to what it was, because what it was always somewhat of a lie. And so I say, let's make it better than it was ever before. And I don't mean that in a Trump, like, make America great again. Like, what I mean by that is let's let's build it on a new foundation. Let's let the great reset be. Let's build this nation on morals and integrity and honesty and kindness, and let's quit feeding into these socially engineered agendas where everyone is getting turned against one another. Men and women have to hate each other, and blacks and whites have to hate each other, and gay and straight have to hate each other, and Christians and atheists have to hate each other. And I was on social media today, and there was a post on Gen Xers, and I am Gen X. And I was so disgusted with the post because it was basically like, baby boomers hate millennials and millennials hate baby boomers, but we rock. And it's like, shut up. Like, it was, now we have to pit age groups against each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, the entire world up to this point is, if you go into every other culture, the elders are respected. The gray heads are the sages. They're the ones that are honored. They're the ones that are worshiped after they're dead. Like, the elderly people were the wise ones. And now it's to the point where we're just like um, hitting the elderly against the youth. And well, I'm from who the heck came up with all this Gen X, Gen Z, millennial, alpha gen, greatest
Yeah.
gen, baby boom? Like, it's completely made up. It's a social construct, and it's a way to categorize yourself, and then you can be ethnocentric within that category because you're better than everybody else. And America's been doing this for years, and there's nothing wrong with patriotism, and I love my country. I'm glad I'm here, but there's a difference between patriotism and ethnocentrism. There's a difference between, I am so grateful for the things that God has given me and the freedoms and the rights that I have, but I'm not better than anybody else. And I'll bet you, if you asked a lot of people who don't live in America if they would give up everything in their life just to come and live in America, people would be like, I don't want to give up my family and my hometown and these beautiful mountains and my language that's hundreds and hundreds of years old, and my culture. Like, no.
Yeah.
So I just think that the way that they are socially engineering all of these different categories, where we are being taught to hate each other or to think we're better, and social media is feeding into
Yeah.
this.
Well, I think
So,
that's definitely done on purpose.
oh yes,
Obviously they
oh
they
yeah,
want us in our groups fighting, hating each other.
yep,
And that's definitely done on purpose by whoever the powers that be are, I believe.
it is,
'Cause
it is,
it stops us having these conversations. It stops us growing as a race and rising up. It keeps
yeah,
us all divided, hating, negative energy. I think plays a big part as well. They want people angry. People go on their social media just for an argument now, and I think
yes,
they want that, and that just adds to the negative energy that I think is promoted.
oh
Uh,
yeah, oh yeah. And I just read something. I'm not going to remember the percentage, but it was over 50%. It was a high percentage. It's the percentage of comments on social media and on YouTube and stuff, the percentage of comments that are bots And so
Yes.
it's like you've got people who are staying up all night angry and composing all these intricate things and coming up with
Fighting.
insults and
Yeah.
all that. And it's like you're fighting with an AI bot,
Literally,
dude.
literally, you're fighting AI. Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. That. Yeah, and that's a massive part of X, Twitter. That was a huge part of what they said when Elon Musk come in. He said that most of it is bots that are just creating conflicts, and it still
Yeah,
is probably a lot of it. But yeah, man,
yeah.
it's
Don't you love it?
crazy. I do love it. I do love social media, to be honest. I don't
I know, I do too.
I don't get involved in arguments. I just go on there and just watch.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many times where I'm one of these people that like hardly ever comments, but I'll go and I'll be like,
Yeah,
and I'll even get some words typed and I'm like, no,
yeah. Put that in the
I'm
drafts.
I'm I'm not playing this game. Like,
Yeah,
no, that's like I am not giving my energy to this. And I
yeah,
mean that word like literally. Like every time I give energy to something, I've lost it. Like,
yeah,
and I'm just to an age where I don't got that much of it. And I
yeah,
just like I am there's certain things I'll comment, like I'll comment if it's like encouraging someone or if I have a
yeah,
joke or whatever, or if someone is like if I'm literally like, but I never do it to be divisive or snarky or hurt someone's feelings or whatever. But there's definitely times where you read things and I recognize that I'm being triggered and I'm like, no, that's what they want. And I don't
yeah,
even know if this is
yeah,
another human being. So like
yeah.
I'm not giving energy to it.
The amount of times I've got on X just to scroll through, have a look, seen something that's really enraged me, and it's brought my whole mood down. And I'm like,
Yes.
I've got so angry over a post on X, and I'm like,
I know.
it's done what it wanted to do. It's brought the energy down, and yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I try
Yeah.
not to feed into that. In 2020 and 2021,
Oh,
I used to tweet a lot of things that I felt strongly about, and that's probably the only time I've really got negative on social media myself. I try to
yeah.
stay away from that. If I get negative comments now towards the show or to me, I just like it. I don't rise to anything like that. I don't see the point.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
social
Yeah.
media is great, but it's got its dark side, that's for sure.
It does. You have to know your own limitations. And man, if you don't have a thick skin for your own sanity's sake and your own health sake,
Yeah,
try to stay off of it, man, because seriously there's a point where it does affect our physical health when we're constantly wound up. And so it's so funny, there's all this stuff out there about what to do, like if you've got anxiety, and like meditate and get a scented candle and like all this
yeah,
stuff, and it's like, dude, all you have to do is just stop reading social media posts and you'll be
yeah,
fine.
yeah. That would change. Yeah, 100%, 100%.
Oh man.
I would love to get into your paranormal experiences and your
Yeah,
thoughts on the paranormal.
absolutely. We got off on a really cool, fun
Yeah,
tangent
man.
there at the
Yeah,
beginning. But people are like, I thought she was the chick that wrote about sleep paralysis. What is she talking about, man? But no, I love this stuff. So yeah, so I ended up writing this book. They only come out at night, exposing the dark weapon of sleep paralysis. And dude, I couldn't have timed this better if I had wanted to. Sometimes the world is just ready for a certain topic. And a lot of times, you got a book or a film, and we've seen this so many times where books and films were ahead of their time. So they crashed in the time that they were in, or they didn't really get much notice in the time they were in. But then 40 years later, it's like, oh my gosh, this is almost prophetic, right?
yeah,
So I I really did not put any thought into what should I write about that'll be a bestseller? Like it was nothing like that. I'd come to a point in my life where I had gotten over the sleep paralysis. And so I felt like I had some things to say that could be helpful. And I spent most of my life not understanding that other people went through this. I thought it was just me. And you wonder if you're crazy or if you're possessed or whatever. And so, what really drove me to write the book is when I realized how many people were suffering from it. And I'm like, I can't not address this, and no one else is addressing it. And the people that are addressing it really don't have the full picture. Um, if you go to a doctor, you're going to get one cookie cutter explanation. And it's not going to have to do with your particular physiology or your medical history or your genetics or your life experiences, or have you gone through trauma, or like, it's only going to be every single person with sleep paralysis. It's this little sleeping disorder, and this is what you do. If you go to a psychiatrist, you're just schizophrenic, or you're on the fringes of schizophrenia or mental illness. So here's the meds, and it's a cookie cutter diagnoses. And then, unfortunately, if you go to the church, for the most part, if you go to a Catholic church, you're probably going to get a exorcist, involved. And if you go to a more Protestant church, the story you're likely going to get, if your pastor has ever even heard of sleep paralysis, is, what did you do to open this door? Did you play with the Ouija board? What are you hiding? Are you cheating on your spouse? Do you have a porn addiction? What have you done to open up these demonic portals and attracted this energy to you? And so what you end up inadvertently doing is, you have pastors who don't have the answers. But instead of admitting, I have no idea what this is or how to stop it, they gaslight the person instead. What did you do?
Yeah.
You must have brought this on. And so one of the things that I say at the very beginning of my book is, until every party is willing to sit down at the same table and share their knowledge, where everyone's going to be walking around with their own puzzle piece. And it kind of becomes like that old adage about the elephant, where you've got a bunch of blind people feeling different parts of the elephant. And so the people that feel the leg thinks it's a tree, and the people that feel the trunk thinks it, they all think it's something different, but it's all an elephant. It's just, you're blindly looking at this one aspect. And so until science, medicine, psychiatry, and religion and spirituality all comes together and adds their piece, because a lot of times there are many things going on. Like, if you are a target for sleep paralysis, there's kind of an MO for it. There's a lot of things that have to be kind of on the checklist. They don't just, obviously they don't go and bug everybody, because there's tons of people that haven't had it, right? And there's a lot of people that have sleep paralysis with nothing spiritual going on. There's just a physiological aspect of when our body shuts down and goes into paralysis while we dream. We don't act out our dreams. And so I've had sleep paralysis before where there's nothing scary. I kind of wake up and I'm like, oh, I haven't quite woke up yet. And so obviously there's like a checklist of things to this.
Yeah.
So one of the things, everyone assumes, because I'm a Christian and I'm going at this from a biblical perspective, most people assume she probably just thinks every single thing is a demon, and everyone having sleep paralysis is just being, attacked by a demon. And that is not what I believe. And so where I like to start is, there's a lot of misunderstanding in even what a demon is. And a lot of people think that a demon is anything evil. So it could be a cryptid. Bigfoot's a demon. The Shadow Man's a demon. The Hat Man's a demon. The witch is a demon. And the fact is, there are a lot of sleep paralysis characters that aren't necessarily a demon. Witches can astral project into your room, like human beings can do it. It could be a human being,
Yeah.
And so where I like to start, just so that we're on the same page in defining terms, a lot of Christians, even, they believe that demons are all of the fallen angels that fell with Satan. And they believe that anything evil or anything ugly or scary or anything is just a demon. But if you go into the history, if you go into the Dead Sea Scrolls, rabbinical literature, Book of Enoch, if you go and you actually research the theological definition of a demon, it is actually the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim giants. That's all they are. And so a fallen angel is a fallen angel. It's not a demon. A watcher, like Samyaza and Azazel, the watchers, they're watchers. And watchers are not angels. Angels are messengers. Angels worked in the mailroom, right? Angel isn't even, it's like a job description. angel just means messenger, right? And so these demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. And are they involved in sleep paralysis? Yeah. But once you start having out of body experiences and you're in the astral realm, or if you're in the occult arenas, like if you're from a generational Satanist family where there's rituals and things going on, there are a lot of other things at play. And some of them are human, some of them are hybrids, some of them are demons, some of them are much higher in rank than demons. And that comes into play in Ephesians 6:12. It talks about how the enemies of God that we're at war with, that live in the heavenly places, which is the astral realm. If you take the Greek in that, epuranios, that is the high places, or that is where these fallen ones dwell. But there are ascended masters up there. There are spirit guides. There are fallen angels. There are archons, principalities, spiritual forces of darkness. Like there's many different categories, and there's probably way more categories than the Bible mentions. The Bible kind of is the cliff notes. It mentions the things that kind of need to be said, but it's certainly the way I always tell people is everything in the Bible is true, but there are a lot of true things that aren't in the Bible. It's
Yeah.
not a collection of every single true thing, you know. So I think there's a lot left out, and they're probably left out for good reason. One of which is that we do tend as humans to be intrigued with some of these things, and that intrigue can lead us down rabbit holes, and they can be distractions, and so such and so forth. So I believe that in addition to the spiritual aspect or a demonic aspect, there can be physiological aspects. Uh, it can be trauma. It can be mental illness. It can be a family history. It can be genetics. It can be your physiology. It can be sleeping disorders. Like a lot of people with sleep paralysis also have breathing type of maladies and disorders and narcolepsy and sleep apnea and things like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, unfortunately, because they also have those things, that becomes the full diagnosis, and the other things aren't addressed. But it can be other things too. It can be ancestral. There could be people in your family line that made vows or did rituals and pledged their bloodline over to these gods and things like that. It can be homes that you've lived in that are charged areas, and it can be there are so many to just truncate this entire phenomenon down to it's a demon
Yeah.
is it's too simple. There are many other things going on, and usually when someone wants to get rid of sleep paralysis, it's not just a matter of I'm going to pray to become a Christian and I never have a problem ever again. A lot of times there's years of healing and there's years of trauma, and even if you didn't have trauma to begin with, you've got it after you've had decades of sleep paralysis, because that stuff does take a spiritual toll on you.
Yeah.
And there's programming aspects to it. Sometimes there's different agendas, like a sleep paralysis agenda and a UFO abduction phenomenon. It's got a lot of similarities, but it's got a lot of differences because they have different agendas. And so some people will talk about seeing shadow people or an incubus or something like that in their bedroom. Other people will talk about seeing blinking and flashing lights or geometric shapes and things like that. And we know, and I won't bore everybody with the details, but if you study symbology or sigil magic, you know, where you've got symbols that have been charged with energy, symbols, even if you or I look at something and we don't know what it means, the people that made it know what it means, and so it
Yeah.
still carries a power. And so we might not exactly know where, let's say, the Freemason symbol with the square and the compass and the G. There's all sorts of speculation out there, like what the G stands for and why this is a symbol, and it's the pyramid and it's a triangle. And I've heard dozens of explanations that all make sense as to what that symbol might mean. And the fact is, if I just think it's a cool symbol and I wear it on my T-shirt, there's energy in that, and there's a power in that, even though
Yeah.
I'm ignorant of it. And that's why there's so many of these symbols hidden in our clothing these days. And there's Saturn swishes on so many things, and there the triangles and all the stuff. Well, the reason why some people, when they have sleep paralysis, they see geometric shapes or blinking lights is, this will kind of be familiar to people who have studied out the MK Ultra. Those are things that have been programmed into your non-conscious during sleep paralysis experiences, usually when you're in the astral and you don't realize it, because when you wake up, you don't remember that part. And so when you see those lights or those shapes, you're thinking like, why am I seeing these shapes? But it is actually reinforcing programming that has been put in there. They're making sure that that programming is staying put. And you may or may not figure out what that programming is. I could go in a million different directions here, but basically, uh, the the similarity between sleep paralysis and UFO abduction, and I know it sounds like I'm all over the map here, but this topic is just so much more complex than people think. They just think it's
Yeah.
bad dreams, or I ate the proverbial bad slice of pizza before I went to bed, or oh, God's punishing me because I looked at that porn mag. I mean, I've heard it all. Believe me, I've heard every explanation as to why people think they've got it. But there's a massive agenda behind this. And if you're having sleep paralysis night after night after night, or you've had it for 10, 20 years, you've been chosen. And they'll tell you you've been chosen because you're gifted and you're special and we need you. You're going to ascend to godhood. You're a star seed. You used to be a god and you're here to help all the stories are out there. But
Yeah.
the truth in that is you have been chosen for this project, but not for all the good, wonderful reasons that they're telling you. The similarity between sleep paralysis and UFO abduction is they are both abductions. And what is so diabolical about the sleep paralysis agenda is, unlike a UFO abductee experience, most UFO abductees cannot tell you what happened, where they were. They have no memory of it until they go into some sort of hypnosis, or their memories are retrieved, but they know something happened because there's missing time. And the missing time is the giveaway that something has happened. They're 100 miles down the road from where they were 5 minutes ago, or
Yeah.
it was bright and sunny when they left, and now it's after dark, or they're in a different location, or something like that. What is so diabolical about sleep paralysis is the same thing is happening. You are being transported, not physically, but you are being transported to the astral realm. You are undergoing some sort of programming, some sort of mind control, some sort of re-education. You are perhaps being involved in rituals. You are maybe making covenants and vows. We can talk about that a little bit later. And when you wake up, not only do you not have a memory of it, but if you have a faint memory of it, it's just a dream. You'll never question it because it was just a dream. And even if 5, 6, 7, 8 hours have gone by, you were asleep.
Yeah.
Nothing here to see. You're never going to question it. You're never going to figure it out. And it took me over 40 years to figure it out. Like, oh my gosh, because I kind of thought my sleep paralysis was just what it was. Here are the nights that I had sleep paralysis, where I woke up and I couldn't move and I felt this presence in the room. What you don't realize is that many of us who have this over the course of their whole lifetime, even when you're not having sleep paralysis, you're having a lot of nocturnal disturbances. There are a lot of dreams that are more than dreams. There are astral experiences. There are people that you are sometimes dealing with in your dreams that are real people. They're not just dreams. And this isn't to say every single night, because we have regular dreams too, where we go to bed and we're defragging, and the pillows are chasing us and we show up to school naked and all that. We got all
Yeah.
that too. But it really is diabolical, because everything, not only in our culture, we're in a scientific method culture, everything has to be logical. and nothing can be supernatural. Everything has to match the scientific method steps or it's not real. And if you fall outside of that, you're crazy, you're delusional, you're mentally ill. And even in the church, over the course of the last 100 years, they have slowly been stripping the supernatural out of the Bible. And I don't mean necessarily that they're taking verses out or they're corrupting it. I'm just saying that they are so clever with communication, and communication is so limited. I mean, even having a face-to-face conversation with someone, they can misunderstand you.
Yeah.
And there's words that have two meanings, and they are so good with this wordplay and these double meanings and these occult blinds that it is extremely easy to take scripture, something that was written hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, in a different culture, in a different language. And if you're not in tune with the culture and the language and the history and the geography of that text and the context of that, it is going to be so easy for someone to read a verse in English and be told this is what it means, and it'll make perfect sense. And it actually is not at all what the context or the meaning of that verse is. So this is where it gets really complicated, is that the supernatural has been stripped out of the church. And so even if you go to the church where they believe in a fallen realm, they believe in Satan, they believe in evil, they believe in demon possession, they believe that an evil creature is coming at the end of the world to kill everybody. They believe all of these things. They believe virgins gave birth. They believe a flood flooded the whole planet. But then you tell them something like, well, I'm having sleep paralysis, and you're crazy? I don't understand
Yeah.
how even the group of people that has an entire world view around this demonic realm and an understanding of it, when you actually bring a real world scenario to them of here is a real world scenario of spiritual warfare and how it's manifesting in my life, and then it just turns into that's not real, you need some medication, let's try to figure out what bad thing you did to bring this on. I mean, there is just such a massive um, gap of knowledge in this particular area. And I'm happy to say that the time has come. I don't even think that there was a term for this, even as far back as the 90s. Like I remember reading a book. It was written by an occultist, a practicing occultist, and he perfectly describes the sleep paralysis scenario at the beginning of his book, and then he explains the whole phenomenon. He relates it to like vampires, in like an astral sense, and he never once coined the term sleep paralysis in the book. And I think he wrote it in
Interesting.
93, I think. But anyway, so even the phrase is new. And I personally don't like the phrase because every single human being has sleep paralysis multiple times every night. When we are in certain sleep stages, we are paralyzed. And
Yeah.
so it's not even a good phrase. And I think that they purposely coined that phrase. It's gaslighting. It's like, oh, well, we all have sleep paralysis,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's not an adequate phrase, but with that said, I don't know what I would call it anyway. But obviously, when we're talking about sleep paralysis, we're not talking about the time when we physiologically shut down during dreams. We're talking about real encounters that people are having with entities that they cannot explain. They experience levels of terror that are indescribable to a waking hour um, scenario. You know, I think we've all had situations where we maybe thought someone broke into our house, or we've had a situation where we came that close to getting hit by a truck, and you know that adrenaline kicks in and our heart is pounding, and we're, you know, sleep paralysis doesn't even touch
Yeah.
that. It is so beyond that, you know. And um people, like if you haven't had it, you just won't get it. And it's fascinating to me when I talk to people who are agnostic or who are of other religions, and who they'll have this experience and they just instinctively start using words that aren't even in their vocabulary. They will almost always say demonic and evil, and they'll say hell, dragging my soul to hell. They will, in trying to describe this experience, people will start talking in theological terms about souls being dragged to hell. It's nonsensical. It'd be like if, let's say, there's no such thing as unicorns, and we've never seen a unicorn, and nobody really believes in a unicorn. And I happen to be out in a field one day and I see a really weird horse. I'm like, well, that has to be a unicorn. Like, why would I go there? I don't even believe that. So
Yeah.
it's very strange how people in the throes of absolute terror will will give their worldview away. We can all kind of put a front on when we're in charge, but when you all of a sudden feel like you're not in charge, you are stripped buck naked, and I mean your soul.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you find yourself describing things and understanding things in terms that in your waking life you would claim to not even believe in. So it is impossible to have this experience and not say that it's spiritual. Now,
Yeah, for sure.
whether you're Catholic or Christian or atheist or agnostic, or even if you talk to New Agers or people who have done ayahuasca, we have sort of had to, I think within the last 50 years, we've had to create a new category. It used to be religion, and now it's spirituality, which is different. You're religious, but then there's a whole bunch of people who aren't religious, but they have this spirituality, and you can talk about new age stuff, and you can talk about more holistic things and the meditation and the ayahuasca and things like that. And so even the fact, we were talking earlier about, has there been a spiritual awakening since 2012? Even the fact that we now have this new category for extremely a-religious people who are very, very spiritual. That compartment has had to be created to accommodate this shift in how people perceive the soul.
So interesting. I don't know if you know this, but I have suffered a lot with sleep paralysis throughout
Oh,
my
no, I
life.
didn't know that.
So
Wow.
shall I tell you a little bit about my background with sleep paralysis?
Yes, please do.
So I've shared it on the show before, but I've not done it for a while. But where I used to live in my old flat, I now live in Dorset. I used to live in Essex, London, and I had sleep paralysis at least once a week. It was very, very regular. I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was a normal thing that everyone probably experienced. I didn't know. I never talked about it, but it was terrifying when it happened, and it happened at least once a week.
Mm.
And it's interesting what you were saying about they've called it sleep paralysis because it is related for me anyway. It was when I was trying to go asleep, but I never felt like I was asleep. It was always
Yep.
before and actually no, it wasn't even before I went to sleep because I'd have the paralysis, the experience, and then I would sort of be up. But I was trying to go asleep when it happened normally. And it was weird for me. So for me, it's very strange. I would lay there and I would get this sensation going through my body like a vibration. It was a nice feeling, which sounds weird,
Hmm.
but it was a nice feeling.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then I was in the state I couldn't move. And there was an entity in the room that I didn't know what it was, but I could see it in my mind's eye, but I couldn't look around the room, but I just knew it was there. And
Yep.
it was a black witch. And when I say a black witch, it was just like a mass of, it didn't look like a stereotypical witch. It just looked like a black mass of evil. That's the only way I could describe it. It was like
Yeah.
nothing I can describe that I could, that I've seen before. And I just knew it was a witch in my mind. I just knew that's what it was. And I'm fighting whatever this thing was. And I would, you know, come out of the paralysis and be like, oh, God, that was mad. That was a horrible,
Mm.
like, fear, that, like, unimaginable fear. You're fighting against whatever this thing is that's trying to get into you. And I would go through this at least once a week. Never talked to my wife about it, never spoke to anyone about it, really. It wasn't until doing this show and talking to other people that have had sleep paralysis that I was like, that's exactly what I've experienced. And listening to other shows where people are talking about it. And it's funny because I moved to this house in Dorset and I've had sleep paralysis here, but probably in the last year, probably 4 or 5 times, which is not a lot compared to what I was having it in my old
Yeah.
place. And it was, and if I have it here, it's been different entities. It's not been that dark witch that it was. It's really strange. And I had it quite
Interesting.
recently on my couch. This is going back probably a couple of months ago, sitting on my couch, and I don't know if I was falling asleep or whatever, but I had this feeling come over me, and a doctor came in and sat down in front of me in my mind's eye.
Yeah.
That's the last time I had it, but it's a very scary thing.
It sure is. It sure is. That's interesting. That's an interesting character, the doctor. Trying to
Yeah.
think if I've ever heard that before. But I mean, I know there's a lot of people that once they're in the astral, the doctor is kind of, a character.
Well,
Um,
I had Timothy Renner on the show from Strange Familiars, and he had an experience that he told me about, and this happened after that. So I don't know if there's anything to do with that, but he had an experience where I believe three doctors were in his room, and they all turned into like grey aliens.
mhm.
And I had spoke this happened a couple of weeks after talking to him. I don't know if there was anything to do with that. There was a connection there. I don't know, but that's the first time I've seen a doctor come in and just sat down in front of me, and I'm in the sleep paralysis state. I can't move, and I get out of it, and I'm
Yeah,
like, wow, that was it's a terrifying experience when it happens,
yeah.
as you know.
That's really fascinating to me because one of the things that I've talked about on other shows is the sleep paralysis kind of story that we've heard now for many, many, many years. That's sort of the Gen X baby boomer version, and it's changing now. It's turning into something different, and some of that might have to do with the culture. Gen Xers and baby boomers, they were kind of told like children are seen and not heard, and don't you just if you were going through something traumatic, you kind of just sucked it up and dealt with it. You didn't have the option of telling your mom and dad, "Hey, I don't want to go to school today," because you know what I mean. You went with the flow,
Yeah,
and so they really could operate the way that they did because you could scare a baby boomer or a Gen Xer their entire life and they might never mention it to another soul. Whereas now everybody, like the younger generations, they share everything and they share
yeah,
it freely and like they'll put personal stuff on social media and everything. So they can't really operate covertly anymore because the younger generation, they're going to be online the next day telling everybody about it, right? And so they're kind of switching their operation. And what's interesting about this whole medical aspect, because a lot of people think that that's purely the UFO abduction phenomenon, where it's like laboratories and medical and whatever. But if you go especially into the realms of the occult, they can't really um, harass you astrally if they don't have your DNA or if they don't have your blood. And they're like blood is a huge component in the occult and in Christianity. Blood is this huge component, right? And we've heard about it recently with like adrenochrome, but it goes all the way back to ancient Samaria and the blood drinking cults of Kish and all the way back to Cain and the dragon courts and these blood drinking rituals and all that. And so that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But I was told by an SRA survivor, of which I know many because I do that line of work with Through the Black. And I was told I had a very, very vivid astral experience. And so I called him up and I didn't say I had an astral, like I just told him, hey, I had this dream last night. And I didn't lead him or guide him because I really wanted his opinion. And he said, Vic, you were in the astral realm. And I said, I thought so. And he said, there's no way you could have been involved in that astral ritual unless they had your DNA. And well, I I spent the first month of my life in the hospital unattended, right? Because I had to be there under care and so I went through a very rigorous deliverance. And I really believe that that whole situation was rectified after that. Now, what happened recently to go along with your theme of seeing this doctor is um, I always up my prayers around the winter solstice because there are a lot of rituals that happen at the solstice, and a lot of those rituals, there are specific incantations against Christians. And, the Christmas season's coming up and, there's a lot of vulnerability. And so um, I think it was on December 22nd, which was maybe the day after the solstice. I think it was the 21st this year. And as I was going to sleep, I felt a prompting to pray for protection when I went to sleep. And I wasn't even making a connection with the solstice at that point. And so I did. And when I went to bed, I said, God, if I get myself into some trouble tonight, and if I wind up somewhere where I'm not supposed to be, will you just either make me go lucid so I can call in the name of Jesus, or send somebody in to help me and get me out, or just wake me up? And so that night, I always sleep through the night. I'm not one of these people that wakes up all the time. And that night I woke up, and it took me an hour and a half to fall back asleep. And it was driving me crazy. I just wanted to fall asleep. And then all of a sudden I remembered, oh, I prayed before I went to bed that I would get woke up if I was somewhere where I wasn't supposed to be. And so I was like, well, where was I? What was the dream that I was having as I woke up? And I remembered it. I was in a long line in a medical clinic, and we were all waiting in line to get our blood drawn. And I felt safe. I was in a dream, and I got to the point where I was going to be the very next one in line, and the person in front of me turned around, and it was my college roommate, who was a friend of mine, you know. And I find this too, a lot of times in dreams, if you're about to go somewhere you're not supposed to go, you're going to cross over a threshold, you're going to take food or drink from someone, a lot of times that person offering it to you is going to be someone you know and love and trust. It's going to look like your mom. It's going to look like your spouse. It's going to look like your best friend.
Yeah.
Those are familiar spirits that are disguised as someone you trust so that you don't think about it and you imbibe. So my college roommate turns around, and I'm like, oh, whoa, hey, I haven't seen you in ages. And out of nowhere, she says, don't worry, it's totally safe and it doesn't even hurt. And I'm like, and then she fist bumped me, like, you got this, girl, right? And
Yeah.
bam, bam, I woke up. And
Wow.
it dawned on me that I woke up right before they were going to draw my blood, which is something that I had worked decades to figure out. One of the reasons they might have access to me is they might have taken my blood when I was a newborn. I did all of the deliverance stuff, went through a whole bunch of garbage to get all of that reversed and get that nullified and those contracts broken. And then here I was, day after a solstice, getting pulled into an astral realm where they were going to draw my blood.
Yeah.
And I was woke up. But even that, and this is why you have to be so sober-minded and vigilant and discerning, and you have to take this stuff seriously. Like, if you have this and you just say, oh, it's just a bad dream, or oh, I don't want to think about it, or I don't even want to know, like, ignorance is not bliss in this case, because there are things that we have to do to protect ourselves. Now, if I had been in that situation, God could have cut it off where I never even got to the astral, or he could have just showed up. He had to prompt me to pray before I went to sleep. And I followed that prompting. I obeyed it. And so sometimes there are things that we have to do
Yeah.
to protect ourselves. And so I think with people that experience this on a regular basis, I don't care what religion you are. I don't care if you go to church or you don't go to church. It's so beyond that, that you are in a dangerous place when you're being dragged into this. These are real entities that are interfacing with you. And the most dangerous ones are the ones that show up and they're absolutely beautiful and they make you feel good and they tell you that everything's great and that you have a gift. I am always nervous when people tell me that they see a beautiful angel that's full of light and beauty and that they were filled with love. Those are the ones to be the most nervous about, because we do know from scripture that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. And this is really interesting, Tommy. If you look at all of the experiences of human beings encountering an angel in the New Testament, or the Old Testament for that matter, and we're talking like these are the good guys, they're sent from God to give a message of joy or glad tidings or some sort of good news or whatever, the response of the human being is always terror. They're always fainting. or they're falling over, or they're wetting their shorts or something, right? And the angel always has to say, "Fear not." Like it's one of before
Yeah.
they don't say like, "Hey, hey, how are you?" or whatever. They always say, "Fear not" first, and a lot of times the human has to be revived. They have to be brought, picked up, or a coal has to be touched through their lips, or there's all these experiences where they they ha- they basically pass out. And so um, another thing that I've noticed about good angels is they will almost always tell you their name and who sent them and why. And a lot of times with some of these, I've heard so many stories, and it's not that bad angels don't ever introduce themselves or give a name, because they do, but I have heard so many stories of people, whether it's a dream encounter or it's an ayahuasca or a psychedelic, where all the person does is see a beautiful being of light, and they're filled with these like orgasmic feelings like they've never felt before in their entire life. And then they wake up and then they say, "I saw Jesus," or "I saw the Holy Spirit." But that being never told them, "This is my name. This is who I am."
Yeah.
You know, and even this used to disturb me as a kid. I didn't understand why when Moses asked the burning bush, like, "What's your name?" You're like, "Oh, I am." Like, "Tell him I am." And I was always like, why? Why are you playing word games? Like, why wouldn't you say what your name is? And that's a whole show in and of itself. But the fact of the matter is, what he we're given the translation in the English. He said his name was Jehovah, however you pronounce that, whether it's Yahweh, Yahuwah, like everybody's fighting over that now. Now everyone's bickering over the pronunciation. But the fact of the matter is, he did give him his actual name. And there's some super, super cool talk about missing context and culture and language and history. There's some super cool things that have to do with that are tied into Joseph and Imhotep. And, Moses is going to talk to an Egyptian pharaoh. And so basically, the way that Jehovah presented himself in the burning bush to Moses, and the way then that Moses went to the pharaoh and said, "I am coming in the name of Jehovah," the way he would have worded that in the ancient languages, Pharaoh would have heard something to the effect of, "I come on behalf of the God that was worshipped by Imhotep," who was someone who was very, very revered in that culture. And so these things that we see in scripture that look like God's being vague, or he's not really telling us, there's this whole mythos surrounding how we're not supposed to pronounce it and all of that stuff. It really, all that is our total misunderstanding of the context of the scriptures. He made his name known. And he said that there was power in his name, and that his name was to be used. And anyone who's had these sleep paralysis scenarios, when you use the name of Jesus, those things are terrified. And
Yeah.
so this whole idea that we're not allowed to say it, and if we say it but we say it wrong, we're calling on a false god. Satan is doing every single thing in his power to make sure human beings don't ever utter that name.
When I'm in a sleep paralysis having an attack now, and in the last, I didn't do it at first, but as I was getting more used to having these attacks, I did use Jesus' name, and that would bring me out of the attack. That was the
Yeah,
way out.
it was. And frighteningly, that is starting to not be the case anymore. I've been hearing more and more people, and I always hesitate to tell people this because I don't want you to misunderstand. There's power in that name, okay? And when you are actually interfacing with a real entity, they will respond to it and they will fear it. But this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. They've developed technology. They have avatars. They have soulless holographic. I, I don't know what their tech is, Tommy. I don't know if it's a hologram. I don't know if it's an avatar. I don't know if it's just an overlay being put onto our third eye. I don't know what their tech is.
So it's sort of like an AI that they're using as well,
Yes,
sort of.
because So if you say in the name of Jesus, get out, those things don't have a soul. They're not real. They're there in proxy of these things. And so um, now the good news about that, because I've interfaced with these before, the good news with those things is they don't respond to the name of Jesus, but because they're not real, they don't want to get too close to you, or you'll kind of figure out that, they're not real. So it's almost like they they can only utter baseless threats because they can't really touch you because they're not real. And kind of what Karen Wilkinson, who was just on your show, one of the early conversations that we had, because we both stumbled upon this, is I believe she had said this, and I thought it was so brilliant, is up to this point, when we're in these situations, we have to say, Jesus, and that makes that entity go away. So now, if you're in a situation where you're saying the name of Jesus and the entity is not going away, we have to switch the prayer to Jesus, take me out of this scenario, because you're then
Yeah.
giving him authority. And so he can come and he can remove you from the situation. And so I'm
Interesting.
finding now with the younger generations, if you're interfacing with these things that are more AI or Avatar or Project Bluebeam kind of stuff, if you're calling on the name of Jesus and it's not working and those things are advancing toward you, or they're still harassing you, or they're prolonging the sleep paralysis experience because that name of Jesus isn't stopping it. If you just switch the prayer to, instead of Jesus, get them out of here, switch it to Jesus, pull me out of here. Um,
Interesting.
you you've then given him the invitation, and he has the legal permission to take you out. So
Okay.
yeah, it's a moving target, Tommy. It's not the same thing as it was 40 years
Yeah.
ago. And there will always be sleep paralysis, but we're entering into a new technological version of it. And lucid dreaming is now reality shifting. It's a whole new sort of exploring a metaverse now instead of like an astral plane. And they're changing all the terms, but it's all still ancient. It's all the same stuff. They just have to change the terms so that it's cooler for the next generation.
Yeah. Can we get into how it started for you and some of the experiences you were having when you was having these attacks?
Sure, absolutely. So I don't remember the first one, and if I had to speculate, and this wouldn't hold up in court, of course, but if I had to speculate, I'm I'm wondering if it started happening from the very beginning of my life. I have one random memory at 2 years old where I was telling my mom I was afraid of the dark and I was having nightmares, and maybe it was just regular nightmares. So,
Ooh, I lost you there.
okay,
Sorry, lost you there for a second.
okay, yeah, I got a little thing on my screen too. Um, So because I can't back any of that up, I can't prove any of that. My first memory of it, I was 5, 4 or 5, because the house I was living in, I was 4 and I was 5. So I was 4 or 5. And what's really fascinating is my first memory of it was also an out of body. And I was in my room, and I got scared. So I jumped out of bed and started running to the door to go run down and wake up my mom. And it took me years to kind of figure this out, but I wasn't really up. It was an out of body. I was, in
Oh
this.
wow.
And I got to the door and the door slammed. And a mocking voice in my head said, they can't hear you. And even if they did, they wouldn't care. And I was like screaming. But then bam, I woke up and I'm in my bed. And what's fascinating to me as I look back, we can say things like, how could a loving God let vulnerable little children be attacked like this? I mean, it really, a lot of people ask that. But what's really fascinating is even as a 5-year old, I had a lot of tools. We kind of think kids don't know what time it is, right? But I had gone to Sunday school enough years where I knew instinctively to call on Jesus and it woke me up. No one ever taught me call in the name of Jesus. Instinctively, since 5 years old, is what I did. And another thing that was really fascinating to me, given that no one had heard of this back in the 70s, and I was just a child, and I had a very basic Sunday school vocabulary, I somehow, as a child, I knew this had to do with the devil. I knew that instinctively. And when I explained this experience to my mom the next day, I mean, imagine how a 5-year-old would explain something like sleep paralysis to their mom. This is what I said. Mom, I had a dream, but it wasn't like a regular dream because I thought I was awake, but I think I was asleep, but I don't know. And I could see my room and I could see my teddy bear and I was wearing the same pajamas that I was wearing to bed. Like as a 5-year-old, I put two and two together that isn't it weird that I was wearing the same pajamas in my dream? Because most dreams aren't coherent, they're
Yeah.
nonsensical. And what's fascinating about this is, the Apostle Paul tells a story about a man who went into the third heaven, which most people think that he's talking about him, but he's not admitting it. But he says, a man I once knew went to the third heaven, which is different than the astral realm. This is the actual throne room of God. But he said, whether he was absent from the body or present, I know not. He was confused. And so that puts us all in good company. When we have these experiences and we're discombobulated and we're confused, if the Apostle Paul couldn't even figure it out, what had happened to him? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, so anyway, that was my first experience that I remember. And I just remember it happened a lot. And my experiences were not as terrifying as some people's. Like some people talk about seeing beings and being pulled off their beds and all this stuff. Thank God I never saw anything. My story is a lot like yours. I knew it was in the room and it was just a blackness and I knew it was evil. And even though I couldn't see it, I just knew if it was moving and I knew where it was in the room.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, what made it scary is just the frequency. It was just over and over. I would have it 3, 4 nights in a row. It'd go away for like a week. And another thing that a lot of people with sleep paralysis talk about, and this is a very real thing, and I had this experience, and psychology tries to poo-poo this as if you dwell on sleep paralysis and you're afraid it's going to happen, it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy because you were meditating on it and you're like drawing it to yourself. But people who have had it will tell you it's another part of the torment. It's another part of the mockery. I would go to bed some nights and I'd just be, everything would be great. And I'm in a good mood and I'm grabbing my teddy bear. And it would be like, you're going to have sleep paralysis tonight. And a terror would seize me before
Oh,
I was even asleep.
yeah.
And I would know, like, it was like they were just telling you. And I'm a night owl to this day. And it's not because
Same.
I'm afraid to it's not because I'm afraid to go to sleep now. It's because when you are afraid to fall asleep for the first 18 years of your life, you don't just wake up all of a sudden and become a morning person. So like, it's just sort of now the habit, but I would try to stay awake as long as possible. And then I had this theory once. I always tell people, anytime you try to outwit these things, they will one up you and it'll get worse. So just don't try to outwit the things. But I had this theory once that if the witching hour is midnight and 3, if I go to bed after 3, they can't get me. And the fact of the matter is they absolutely can. It's 3 o'clock somewhere,
Yeah,
right?
it's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So it happened on a very regular basis. And, I think to the best of my novice abilities, if I had to guess why was I a target? There was a couple things unique to my childhood. And one was that, like I said, from day one, I was in the hospital. And that's traumatic for a child. And when you're talking about early brain development, a child can't tell the difference between pain and fear that's good and necessary or for your benefit or pain and fear that's trauma. And so when you are repeatedly before the age of 3 being handed over from your parents into the hands of a total stranger, and then your parents leave and then they're sticking needles in you and you don't know, like
Yeah.
your little 2-year-old mind can't comprehend. And so you develop this, I've got to take care of myself kind of survival mode. If mom and dad aren't going to take care of me, I better do it, because you don't understand that that's a doctor who's helping you. You can't differentiate that. And so there was a lot of up until I was about 15, 16 years old, I was in the hospital a lot. I was having all these reconstructive surgeries. I was really beat up after the surgeries. I'd have to go to school with stitches still in, and I'd get made fun of. And, again, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. It made me stronger. I wouldn't change a thing. If I could go back, I wouldn't change a thing. It made me who I am today.
Yeah.
But then the second thing that happened is we had an experience when I was probably 2 and my brother was 4, and we lived in a house, and a lot of paranormal stuff happened in that house. And I don't know if my dad ever experienced it, but my mom and my brother and I all did in different ways, which is why I think that's where the sleep paralysis started for me, even though I don't remember it. And there were a lot of long-term effects on the family that it took us many years to figure out that the source of it was probably that house. And we did find out a couple years after we left, because we were renting the house, that a neighbor had written my mom and asked if anything weird had ever happened in the house. And my mom was a very private person. So she didn't, she was kind of played dumb and said, no, why, And the neighbor said, well, we all think that house is haunted because it's owned by a satanic high priest, and we think he does rituals in the basement. Well, this was the 70s, and so we were about as clueless about that kind of stuff as that. There's no such thing as satanic high priests who do rituals. Like, we didn't. That made no sense to me, uh, and it really wasn't until the maybe 10 years ago when I first heard about Russ Dizdar, and Russ Dizdar started talking about this stuff, and all of a sudden that period in our life, in our family's life, in that house, it all made sense. Because um, it's not that I didn't believe in that stuff yet, until what is really involved, you have no idea that how really organized that kind of thing is. So I think it was a combination of both of those things, having a lot of trauma, which created a lot of anxiety. And but that's the thing too. I mean, I'm a big one for being accountable for everything that I can be accountable for, because anytime you take accountability for something, you're closing a door. You're only helping yourself. And so if you're always a victim, that's great. You look perfect. You didn't do anything wrong. But if you're always a victim, you can't take control of the situation because it's
Yeah.
not in your hands. And so I've never had a problem with like repenting or getting doors closed, because it's only benefited me in my getting rid of this happening. And so I had to realize that as I got older, my coping mechanisms for handling the sleep paralysis became not helpful. And so I ran the gamut, Tommy. I had high anxiety and fear of going to bed. I wasn't ever afraid of the dark, ironically. I didn't have to have a night light or anything like that. But anxiety, that opens doors. And even though you can't fault a 5-year-old for being scared, it created tons of anxiety. But then as you get older and you go through puberty and stuff, then there's this phase that you go through where you hate it, but you're almost intrigued with it. Like, why are they after me? Is there something
Yeah.
special? And then I went through a very long phase where I was really intrigued with things that were very, very dark. And I'm glad I had Christian parents that were sort of strict. And there was a lot of things I would have done as a teenager if I could have, but there's ways I would have dressed, or there's piercings or tattoos, or there's things I would have done that I just never was allowed to do. And thank God. But I was into very dark music and horror movies and death metal. And so there's a point where the original source of this might not have been my fault, but are there things along the way that I did to keep those doors open, or to open more doors and to exacerbate the situation? And so I think that's another place where it gets sticky to overcome this, is because um, a lot of people are willing to do the easy stuff. They're willing to throw the stuff away in their house that they think might be opening the door. They might be willing to forgive a person who hurt them, or whatever. But there is a point where we also have to really do some self-reflection and realize that there is a lot of things related to sleep paralysis that nobody wants to talk about because they're embarrassed or they're afraid of being judged. But It is no secret that there is a massively sexual component to sleep paralysis for many people, not everybody. I have spoken to many people who talk about having sleep paralysis at a very young age, and it ended up being a sexual awakening. And it was through those experiences that masturbation and pornography and same-sex attraction became introduced to them. And they have no memory of it actually happening. And again, I think this is things that can happen in the astral that they don't remember when they wake up. But these are the kind of things that we have to realize that, okay, it's pretty easy to go through your house and throw away all your heavy metal albums. But if that doesn't solve the problem, there's a point where we do have to do some serious heart work, and we have to really think about, are there things along the way that I flirted with, or that I did, or that I participated in, or that I sort of enjoyed despite being frightened? Is there anything I need to repent of? Not because you should feel guilt or shame, not because God's mad at you, but simply because it closes doors. It's like, if you want to get rid of this, you're going to do everything to close the doors. And it's just part of the closing door ceremony.
Yeah, yeah. When you was getting these attacks, was it always the same entity throughout your life?
That is such a great question, Tommy. I'm so glad you said that. So for me, I don't know because I never saw it, but it always had the same energy. And the reason why I think that it was is because I had an experience about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was one of those horrible nights, where you can't sleep and you look at your alarm clock and it gets closer and closer to the time you have to get up and you're desperately trying to fall asleep.
Yeah.
And finally, about an hour before you have to get up, you have all of these where you do finally fall asleep, but you dream that you're getting up and getting ready for work. And then you wake up and
Yeah,
you
it's the
realize, and it's just
worst.
over and over.
Yeah,
Oh, so it was
worst, man.
one of those horrible mornings. So I couldn't figure out anymore if I was awake or not, or if I had already gotten ready for work, because I was on about the 8th iteration of this. I mean, it just kept going. So it happened again, and I was like, I've got to figure out if I'm asleep or awake. And what's really funny to me, I don't know why this is, I'm waiting for someone to write to me and say that happens to me too. One of the aspects of astral projection is people talk about how they can fly. And I can't ever fly, but I can, when I get out of my body, I am literally making motions like I'm swimming through the air. And it's drudgery, like it's a hard swim. But
Yeah.
so I decided I got to figure out if I'm awake or asleep or not. And so I saw my bookshelf and I thought, I'm going to go and pull a book off my bookshelf. And if I can't pull it off, I'm going to know I'm still asleep. So I'm out of my body swimming through the air. You think right then and there I'd figure it out, right? But I wasn't lucid, so I didn't figure it out. So I reached for the book and my hand went through the book. And a little bit of fear started to creep up. So I tried it again and my hand went through the book. And now I have a mixture of fear, desperation, and anger. Like, I'm going to grab this book. So finally I was like, I am going to grab this book. So instead of grabbing at it, I thought, I'm going to take both of my hands in front of me and bam, I'm going to clasp the book like this and, get it two-handed. So when I went to do that, I saw in front of me just my hands, and they were like corpse arms. They were white, translucent blue veins with dirt under the yellow nails. And then I had a sense that there was a group of, I don't know why it can be this precise. I felt like there are 4 witches, female, laughing at me. And then I woke up. And ironically, I woke up because my alarm went off. And so I wonder, don't you always just wonder what would have happened if the alarm had gone off? Like, how long would that have
Yeah.
gone on? What would have
Yeah.
happened? Like that kind of stuff drives me nuts. But the reason why I think it was the same entity the whole time is because that time it was something different. And instead of thinking it's one malevolent male energy, it was like there's 4 catty female energies in the room, right? And interestingly, even though there were 4 of them, it was less scary than the one
They
male
were
energy.
not as powerful.
Not as powerful. Yeah. It was almost like if I had stayed in the dream and could see them, I probably would have been like, what are you laughing at? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they more made me feel shame, like kind of like in junior high when I got teased. I wasn't afraid so much as I I want to be like, what are you laughing at? You know, it was more of like a rejection response. But anyway, I know that Russ Dizdar did say once publicly that if you have sleep paralysis, it's like one entity assigned to you, like for your whole life. And I don't know where he got that from or what his sources were, but I do know with familiar spirits, one of the reasons why, again, smoke and mirrors, they look more powerful than they are. It's not that they're omniscient or that they can read your mind. It's that if they're immortal and they've been watching you your whole life and your mom and your grandma and your great grandma, they have all the information. They know it, you know, and so they look powerful.
Yeah.
And so it would make sense to me if this was some sort of a familiar spirit that it would be assigned to you because they're the ones that have your file, right? They're the ones that know everything. And if they ever call in sick and they get a sub, the sub's not going to know
Yeah.
anything about you, you know.
Yeah.
But I also think, and oh gosh, this is getting into a whole other territory. But this stuff just sounds so crazy, Tommy. But there are things that it's more talked about in other cultures, but it's this concept of a spirit spouse. And you'll hear about this like bride of Satan ceremonies in secret societies and in the occult where they are legitimately putting a girl in a wedding gown or a red dress and she's getting married to Satan or some sort of demonic entity. And I suspect that this goes on in the astral. And one of the reasons why children and are being targeted for sleep paralysis is I believe that these bride of Satan ceremonies are going on in astral. And you are legitimately, legally covenanted because you have probably played along with it without knowing it. And this is where it gets so diabolical because the spirit realm is so legalistic that you can break these covenants. But how many people are going to get to the point in their life where they figure out that this is what's happened and this is what's going on? And how many people, even if they hear about this, are going to be willing to consider it?
Yeah.
I heard about this back in 2013. And I threw the book across the room because I was like, I do not want to know this. I was not ready. I do not want to know. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. And it terrified me. And so I kind of sat on it for almost a decade. And there was another time where it kind of came forward and I had a Zoom call set up with the guy who's written books on this. And I ended up no showing. Like I didn't call in. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to know. But another reason why I think it could be the same entity is if you're pledged to an entity in some sort of a ritual or ceremony, you are sort of their slave or their bride or their spouse or whatever you want to call it. And the incident that I told you that I said that I believe broke this whole thing for me, where they had to then come back and try to get blood again, right? This all sounds so crazy. I mean, even as I'm telling it, Tommy, like I understand how crazy
Yeah.
this sounds.
Not to
But
me.
okay, good. So after I had gone through the deliverance with a very good friend of mine who is well trained in this area, uh, she didn't use the word spirit spouse, but she said there is an entity. I see an entity who will not leave. And we prayed for hours. And even after the thing left and she couldn't see it anymore, she's like, he left there was like, she could still see like a symbol. And so she prayed and she's like, oh my gosh, Vic, this isn't, the entity is still here. He left it's not a mark. It's not a symbol. It's a brand, you know, like how you brand cattle.
Yeah.
And, and she figured out you aren't just in a covenant, you were branded. And I have since now heard that word several times with other things that people are telling me. And anyway, after we prayed and kind of got through this whole thing, I didn't feel anything. Like I didn't feel a weight lift or I didn't start speaking in tongues and I didn't rile around on the floor. Like there was absolutely, I felt nothing during the prayer, nothing after. I mean, it was very anticlimactic. And I think it's good for people to know that you can legitimately be delivered without flailing around on the floor and screaming and throwing up and spitting up pea soup and doing a whole Linda Blair thing. Like, it does not have to be, it's not that way for everyone. So don't
Yeah.
think that if that doesn't happen, you haven't been delivered. This is when I knew that that prayer had been effective. Within a couple of days, and this was last year, I had a dream where I was pulled into the astral and I was in like a Harry Potter kind of house. And apparently I had lived there and I had lost my room. It was like a dormitory. And I'm at a front desk with a stereotypical looking witch. I mean, she didn't have the hat on, but it was like the long black hair with the black nails and the whole like eye rolling cliche, thing. And I come into the dream in the middle of it and I'm arguing with her because I'm mad that she gave away my room. And I'm like, I never said I was moving out. She's like, yeah, you did. And I'm not connecting in my mind that when I said I'm moving out was when that prayer.
Yeah.
And so another girl comes up to the desk and she's like, are you trying to take my room? I'm like, are you the one that took my room? And she's like, it's my room now. And the witch has just got this smile on her face. She's just loving every minute of this. So she's like, I have a way to settle this. And then we're instantly in a different room. And it's like a huge gymnasium, but it's got no roof on it. And it's only got 3 walls. And on the 4th wall is an entire audience of spectators, but they're all in shadow. The only one I can see is the witch. And along the left-hand wall, there are 5 or 6, I can't remember anymore, there are 5 or 6 old Gothic thrones, high up and just very Gothic, and they're all empty. And this girl who got my room is standing facing the chair, and I'm standing behind her. And there are 2 or 3 girls in front of every throne. And we're given instructions by this witch. And she says, all of you are going to walk up to the throne and you're going to make 3 vows to the throne. But you cannot use the words I or we. And at this point, I thought, that is really specific. What? And because I questioned it, I went lucid. And I heard in my head, and I'd like to believe that, it was the Spirit of God speaking to me. I heard in my head, you do not belong here. Do not make those vows. Get out of here as quickly as possible. So now I'm scared because now all of a sudden I realize what's going on. So the witch goes on to say, there's only 6 chairs, but there's 18 of you. One person, one girl per line will like win depending on her vows. And she'll get to sit in that chair and be like all powerful or something. I don't know. And I'll get my room back, I guess, right? I don't know. So I'm sitting here terrified thinking, I'm not going to make these vows. Are they going to chop my head off? Are they going to, what's going to happen? So the first girl ahead of me, like the first 6 girls, like step forward. And I realized that they're all making their vows silently in their head. And I'm like, oh, thank God. They won't even know that I haven't done it. Like, oh, thank God. So the girl gets done. And as the girls get done, they're filtering through the crowd and they're going into like a back room to wait until everyone's done. I don't realize until a little later in the dream that we're all wearing the proverbial cliche black hooded robes that kind of go to like the thigh. They're not all the way to the floor. I walk up to the chair and I close my eyes, and all I do is I enunciate very clearly, I do not consent. And not only am I not making my 3 vows, but I broke one of the rules, right? I said the word I, which you're not supposed to say, which if anybody knows what that means, please write to me and tell me, because make 3 vows, but don't say I or we. That makes no sense to me. So I turn around and I'm walking through the crowd and I'm looking at the witch and she's smiling with approval. So I realize that I pulled off a coup, and I get into the back room. And so now I'm walking into all these other girls, and I turn around, and as I'm turning around to kind of face the back of the crowd and the gymnasium, just as I'm thinking, oh, wow, that was easy, I see a large little bit larger than a basketball orb that was sentient. It was moving, and it looked celestial. There were stars and glitter, and like this large orb manifests in the seat of the throne that I had just stood in front of. And I realized later that that whole thing was a lie. We weren't making vows to the chair because we were going to sit in it. We were actually making vows to whatever entity that was sitting in those chairs that we couldn't see. But I didn't figure that out until I had woke up and prayed about it for a while. But anyway, just as I'm thinking, wow, that was easy, I turn around, this orb manifests, and within seconds, it flies through the air in a zigzag kind of pattern, and it leaves this like contrail of light behind it. It slams into my gut like a cannonball. And, it knocked the wind out of me. And at this point, my cloak gets ripped and torn off of me. And I'm clothed underneath, but in sort of a cliche, growly demon voice, he says, like on the whole way as he's coming at me, he said, "You betrayed me." He slams into my gut, and I go flying into the back wall. I go through the wall, and I'm in interstellar space. And he, instead of pushing me down, which would make sense, like you're going back down to earth or you're going to hell or whatever, he was pushing me up, 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 which is contrary to the way that we conceptualize heaven and hell and all that.
Yeah.
Which leads me to believe, where were we, but I start saying, Jesus, 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 help me, Jesus. I mean, I'm terrified. And after I said Jesus several times, I stopped in midair, but it was still there, because like if I went to move forward, I would bend over it. I was unable to move. So I'm just hovering in midair in interstellar space. And so at that point, I start quoting, "No weapon formed against me will prosper. All those who rise up against me will fall. I will not fear what the devil will bring me. I am a servant of God." And at that moment, I wake up because my phone is ringing. And it's my dad calling me in the middle of the night. And I answer it, and he's like, "Vic, are you awake? Are you awake? Vicki, are you awake?" And it sounds like there's something wrong. And I'm like, "Yeah." And then he says, "Well, it's like 3 a.m. Why am I calling? Wait, why am I calling you?" He's like, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." And he hangs up.
Wow.
And so there's so many things I could tell you about that. Like, I could have been rescued in a million different ways, but I'm rescued literally by a phone call from my father, who biblically is my protective covering in this world because I'm not married, right? And so there's so many spiritual warfare like giveaways in this scenario, right? But what I realized, and this again, believe it or not, is still answering, is it the same entity your whole life? I think that when we prayed and we fingered that entity and we saw the brand and we prayed against it and we broke every single contract. Here's where it gets scary. Yeah, you can break all these contracts. He immediately tried to dupe me into re-vowing, re-getting into that, right? So that made me feel kind of insecure. It's like, so at any point, is he going to like keep trying or whatever? And I haven't had any issues since, but they have to have the legal right to you. And if they don't, they have to get it. And so the thing that is both the good news and the bad news in this scenario is, the great thing about legal contracts is they can be broken. There are always stipulations and things at play where you can break the contract. So all this crap you hear on TV about if you sell your soul to the devil, you can't ever get it back. Yeah, you can. That's a bunch of baloney. But what's more important is if you think that the only way you can actually get into one of these contracts is to show up at the crossroads and, play the fiddle with, the Faustian bargain, or sign your name in blood on a record contract or all this silly stuff, the fact of the matter is these contracts are made in the astral realm. And if for anyone that this is hitting a nerve with, or this is making sense to, chapter 4 of my book is called threshold covenants and astral vampires, or astral vampires and threshold covenants, there is a massive theme in scripture and in vampire lore about the threshold, how they cannot hurt you unless they're invited over the threshold.
Yeah.
And this isn't just a vampire thing. This is actually a spiritual, this is a law of the spirit realm, period, good or bad. When Jesus says in Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone hears my voice and opens the door and invites me in, I will sup with him and he with me. That's a threshold covenant. Jesus doesn't barge in. He doesn't break in. He doesn't pretend to be a candygram and sneak his way in. Like, he knocks at the door, and if you answer and open the door and invite him over the threshold, then and only then will he impinge upon your life. Like, he doesn't barge in. We see that also in John 10 with the sheep and the sheepfold, where it says, Jesus says, I am the gate, and anyone who comes in any other way is a thief and a robber. And that's really what sleep paralysis is. It is the sheep thief trying to sneak his way over the threshold by posing as someone you would invite in, a loved one, dearly departed grandma, or Jesus. Oh, it was an angel. And so they disguise themselves in these ways so that you will invite them in. And we see this imagery all over sleep paralysis. It's why most people will see this entity at the door. They'll see him at the bedroom door.
Yeah.
And then when you have fear, when you have all that terror, that acts as an invitation. You're drawing them over the threshold with that fear, because that's what they want. That's what they're drawn to. It's like pheromones. For those that know their power in Jesus and say in the name of Jesus, or you are not allowed in here, or get out, or whatever, they're not allowed over the door. That quells the fear. That then the fear is theirs. Then they're the ones that are afraid. So there is all sorts of massive connotations and correlations between our modern sort of romanticized, caricaturized versions of vampires. If you actually go back into ancient lore, like the Lamashtu demons, these screech owl of Isaiah, the Lilith, there's a whole pantheon of these things depending on what culture. Lamia, Lamashtu, Lilia, Lilith, the screech owl. And these were all night demons that would come over the threshold. They would usually attack women, mothers, pregnant women, nursing mothers, babies in the crib. That they would kind of go for the most vulnerable. And I do go into a little bit of detail in my book about the whole vampire aspect of all of this.
What do you think is the ultimate goal of this might be a difficult question, but the ultimate goal of these entities? Like, if they win, if they get what they want from us, what is their ultimate goal, do you think? Okay.
This is usually the question where all the tech goes haywire, so just be prepared.
Okay, I'm ready for that. That like, happens a lot.
Honestly, as soon as you say what's their goal,
really?
That's when, like, hello, Vicki, I can't hear you anymore. I'm like, oh
man.
Here we go.
Okay, we're ready for it.
So anyway, now we're getting really Star Trek. Now we're getting like, if you haven't followed me this far, you're not going to follow me to the goal line here, right? But here's the deal. The astral realm is, I believe, like a classroom. It's a reprogramming classroom. So when you have people who are abducted and they're brought onto the UFOs, that is more of a genetic experiment, right? That's the genetic wing of the New World Order. So those are the people being taken to the hospitals, and that's the genetic aspect. The people that are brought into the astral realm are typically people who are really creative. They have some sort of artistic ability. They're a musician, they're a writer, they're a poet. They're creative. They are usually extremely empathetic. They're empaths. They tend to be loners, not just introverts, but very much loners. They don't need other people's approval to inform their own self-identity, they tend to be people that have gone through a lot of trauma, which is why they've grown to become so independent, because they haven't been able to rely on people to meet their needs growing up because they were in dysfunctional or toxic or traumatic situations. And they tend to be very spiritual. So if they're a Christian, they're very close to the Lord. There's an intimacy there. There's a love and a knowledge of the word. There's some discernment there. There's some giftings there. If they're not a believer, it tends to be more psychic giftings. But this is kind of the MO. So what's happening is, if you look at a lot of the people who were card carrying, like theosophists in the past, who did a lot of astral projection, and I'm thinking of like Helena Blavatsky and H.P. Lovecraft and Lewis Carroll, a lot of literature, a lot of like the most famous children's books. Frank Baum, Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, anything H.P. Lovecraft, Blavatsky, but Galen, the super surgeon of the 2nd century, and I talk a lot about that in chapter 2 of my book, The Asclepions. That's another huge aspect of this. But if you look at the 7 sciences, of the liberal arts that are still a bulwark of our education system to this day, if you look at the main influences in medicine, science, philosophy, religion, music, art, a lot of the textbooks and the theories and the ideas and the concepts that to this day are considered the authorities on the subject are people that found their information astral projecting. They had spirit guides, they had ascended masters, they did automatic writing. Helena Blavatsky even talks about how she doesn't even understand half of what she wrote. You've got all of this. And so these men and women used their intelligence, their ability to be influencers of their time, who transformed culture in their various fields of expertise. They were brought on as teachers and leaders, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of disciples have been raised up through the public education system because we are raised on these people's ideas. Now, they might not stick a Helena Blavatsky book, they're not going to hand out secret doctrine to a bunch of 10th graders, right? But the textbooks and things are all highly influenced by these people's writings. And a lot of the books that we read growing up and a lot of the children's books, they are based on the doctrines that these highly influential people wrote about, but they all got this information in another realm. It was downloaded to them. It was taught to them. And so my hypotheses from my own experience and the temptations and the ways, the things that I had to navigate out of, and the things that the Lord showed me as I navigated out of it, is that they are picking a group of people to be the educators, to prepare and change and transform the culture, so that when their Messiah comes to earth and preaches all of these doctrines, and all of those prophecies are fulfilled, that will look like the real Messiah. And we talked earlier about how there will be world peace for a time. Cancer will be cured and people will be living in harmony and debt-free. And we are going to pretty much all fall for this. Even in scripture, it says that when this false Messiah comes, even the elect would fall for him if that were possible, which says to me that we are going to be supernaturally rescued before we do ourselves in for our own stupidity, right? So I think that the people that are having sleep paralysis, we know this from trauma-based mind control. We know this from MK Ultra. Trauma is the foundation of molding and programming these minds. And so when you have intellects like Blavatsky and Lovecraft and Galen, their intellect was molded through trauma, which was these sleep paralysis experiences. And Lovecraft talks about the paranormal stuff that was going on in his life. And so it is a form of trauma-based mind control. They're using trauma and fear. It's sort of like this Hegelian dialect sort of a thing. They come in and they create all of this trauma and turmoil in your life, but then they also provide the solution. And we see this a little bit in the M. Night Shyamalan movie Split, where you find out at the end that he saves the girl. He doesn't kill the girl because he sees that she's been cutting herself. And she cuts herself because she's been traumatized. She's been sexually abused by, was it an uncle or something like that? And when he realizes that she is also split, he recognizes her as one of the chosen ones, because those who haven't been split are wastes. They've wasted themselves. And so the philosophy of that movie is that people who have underwent trauma-based mind control and who have split off into disassociated parts, they're the useful ones. They're the gods, you know. And so it's the same sort of scenario where they come in to a child's life, everything's fine, they're from a good home, and they create this trauma. And in creating the trauma, then they provide the solution, because after you've had all the scary stuff and the demons, then you have the angels that are coming to help you and to rescue you and to say you have a gift. And the reason they're after you is because you have a gift. And flattery, they use flattery. Let me tell you something someone told me once. Someone told me once, hey, Vic, you know, there are certain Indian tribes that choose as their warriors the boys who are born with facial deformities. So all of the warriors in that culture are boys who are born with like a deformity, like a birth defect, like you. And so it was kind of like their way of flattering me, like, oh, you know, whatever. But what they said is the reason why they believe that these boys are predestined to be the warriors is because they believe that the birth defect was caused, that in the womb they went to war with the demon and they won because they weren't miscarried, right? So if a baby comes out of the womb with deformities, they beat a demon, right? And so that's the kind of crap that they tell these little kids. Like, yes, you've been hurt, you've been torn, you've been broken, you've been abused, but it's because we're honing your gift. It's a bastardization of what the scripture says. Like the scripture says that God works all things together for our good. Like he can take all of the bad parts in our life and the things that were, Joseph said it to his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And so it's a bastardization of that, because it's not like I'm going to make something beautiful out of these ashes. It's I'm going to burn you to the ground and then I'll help you make something beautiful out of the ashes that I created, right? That's kind of what they're doing. And so what their end game is, I believe, is they're taking people who are extremely overlooked in this world. They're people who are creative and talented, and people who are highly intelligent and capable of changing the world. But they're overlooked because they're not beautiful enough, they're not funny enough, they're not athletic enough. We're overlooked, and we're just looking for someone to notice that there is something special in us. And so they come along and they give us what we want. You are special. We need you. The world needs you. You're a god. And the reason why you have so much pain is because you're bearing the weight of the world on the shoulders, and you have the gifts, and it's all of this flattery. And for those that fall for it, they get groomed. And this sleep paralysis experience is grooming. And there's different methods. Some people, they groom to destruction. They just use them because they just have to, you know, step on their backs to get where they're going. So some of them are just useless fodder to them, but they're looking for the ones that are gifted and willing to use their gifts. to educate the world in a system of philosophy and religion and science and technology, the confluence of Kabbalah, Torah, science, and technology that are going to be the leaders of the future. They're going to be the musts and the Gateses, and they're going to carry forward their agendas, and they're going to influence people to follow them and to believe them. It's all a part of the agenda. They're grooming all of us so that when the real Messiah comes, we don't recognize him. And when the false Messiah comes, we say, he's the one.
Interesting. Do you think a lot of these, like the Musks and the Gates and people like that, do you think a lot of these are people that have already been taken, possibly?
Yeah, I do. I do. I know it's goofy, and I know they purposely make some of these conspiracy theories sound so goofy. And I think they purposely make some of them, they add a lot of unbelievable detail to it just to make the whole entire thing. It becomes
Yeah,
a throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So you you've got a kernel of truth in it, but then the backstory that they put around it is so ludicrous that you'd have to
makes
be
people.
insane.
Yeah,
Yeah. And in many cases, the story surrounding it is ridiculous, but it's covering up the fact that there might be a grain of truth to it. And
yeah,
I, I guess, Tommy, what I struggle with is I believe that all human beings are under the mercy of God. And if we're created in his image, I really believe that a person has to get to a very, very unusual space of reality before they start going against some of the basic tenets of humanity. Like when you're talking about serial killing and rituals and cannibalism and destroying lives and grooming children. And when you start talking about all that, I mean, I know no one is righteous, no, not one, but I think that you have to be at such a level of debauchery before you would be willing to do something like that. That maybe the one of the ways that I cope with trying to get my mind around that is to believe that maybe they're possessed or they've been taken over or maybe they've been killed or cloned or maybe they have a double, you know, maybe that's why they've been obsessed with twins. Maybe a lot of these people have twins and that's why we're seeing differences. But the fact of the matter is, Tommy, the reason why we want these logical explanations is because we don't really want to come to grips with the fact that human beings are capable of that level of evil. Because if we are,
yeah.
then it's in every one of us. And I think that's what we all. Part of this is also we want to believe that these horrible things that these elite people do. You must be doing this because you've become something else. You've become a gibberim, you know. You've sold your soul. You've been cloned because if they haven't and they're doing all of this in the consciousness of a human being, then it's something we're all capable of. And I don't think that's something any of us ever want to really come to grips with.
Fascinating stuff.
It sure
Can
is.
it is fascinating. Can I the astral realm that you've been to? Is it something that you can access yourself? Like say tonight, if you wanted to go there, could you do that? Or is it something that
I
just happens out of your control?
For me, it happens out of my control. And I know there's people that can do that. It doesn't happen intentionally. And with me, for me, it's not a scary place. Like it's not like hell or demons walking around and everything. For me, I always know I'm there because there's recurring places that show up in my dreams over and over and over and over again that I've never been to in real life. There's a shopping mall I'm always at, and there's houses I'm always at, and things like that. And as soon as I get to a dream and I walk into a place and it's that shopping mall, I'm like, oh crap, here I am again.
Yeah.
Like it almost becomes triggering when you've been there so many times. But there are things that happen. I don't get myself there intentionally, but I pretty much have figured out how to get myself out of those places intentionally because um, they're so triggering. And it gets to the point where at my age, there's shopping centers and stuff where I know the whole map of it now. Like I know if I turn this corner, I go to this level, I know where all the stores are, and it's always the same. And even though, shopping centers in the real world have changed throughout the years, it's always the same stores. This one like never gets updated. It's always like the same stuff. And I'm almost always by myself. I'm not usually in the mall with anyone. I mean, there's other people there, but and another thing that I read recently, and this blew my mind. I was reading Robert Monroe's Far Journeys trilogy because he's kind of like the father of astral projection. And um, I'm not an advocate for astral projecting, but if you're going to talk about it and you're going to help people, you have to know what it's about and what people are teaching about it. Robert Monroe would be another one of those influencers who went into the astral realm and not only changed um, religion and spirituality, but also changed our military because we have remote viewing to this day because that's just astral projection.
Yeah.
And he's the one that taught our military that. But Robert Monroe said that if you ever have a dream where you've lost your car and you're in a parking lot or a parking ramp and you're looking all over for your car, that is an indication that you have been in the astral realm because the car is a metaphor for a vessel that gets you around. Like you can't move around if you're not in that car. And our soul can't move around if it's not in its body. Like this is our soul's car. It's our vehicle.
Yeah.
And when I read that, I got chills because I have had that dream so many times. And that's when I had to start thinking, I think that I've been in that dream world way more than I ever imagined. I thought it was just the sleep paralysis, and that's the thing too. When you do kick the sleep paralysis, when you figure out how to get rid of that, and you absolutely can, um, they still have ways to harass you at night. They might not be able to appear in that way anymore, but it's kind of like in video games. Like once you pass a level, you get to a new level, and now there's more subtleties to that level that make it more difficult to pass that level, and things become invisible, and you need more power pills and things like that. So um, I'm very happy and very relieved that I don't have the sleep paralysis anymore. But the stuff I'm enduring now, the next level of the video game that I'm trying to get through, is it's not as traumatizing, but it's more exhausting. You can sleep 9 to 11 hours and just wake up and have chronic fatigue the whole rest of the day just
Yeah.
because of what's going on. And so I'd much rather be in this place than having the attacks. But I just want people to be warned. And I'm not talking about the people that had this once or twice, in puberty and never had it again, or they had it one time during a really stressful time in their life. I'm talking about the people that have been targeted and harassed their entire lives with this stuff. That even once the sleep paralysis is gone, there's other things then that you have to deal with because they're still going to harass you in your sleep, but they're going to appear differently, and you're going to have to acquire a whole new level of discernment to know that they're evil because they're appearing differently, and you're not getting the same overwhelming senses, and you're not smelling them, and your hair isn't going up anymore, on your arm. And so uh but I also believe, and I talk about this in the last chapter of my book, I do believe that for a lot of people who are being targeted for this, they're probably being targeted for a reason. There's probably some threat there. There's probably some purpose to that person's life. And if there is some sort of grand spiritual purpose for your life, even if all the bad stuff goes away, you are probably always going to have a very vivid, active, busy dream life. And we see it in scripture. I mean, look at poor Daniel. I mean, that guy was physically ill when he was having his visions and things. And Elijah, Jeremiah, a lot of these people, Ezekiel, Moses, these people who had these visions, John, when he wrote Revelation, a lot of these prophets who were chosen, they got to see a lot of really amazing things. They got to be used by God. They got to perform miracles. They got to see amazing things. But in many ways, a lot of these people were tormented. They had hard lives. They had to face tremendous amounts of fear. They were put into situations they didn't want to be put in. Like Moses was scared to go before Pharaoh. And a lot of them were martyred and didn't meet good ends. And so I don't want people who experience this to think that the litmus test for overcoming this is that life settles down into this nice, perfect little happy, easy, you know. For those that have these spiritual leanings or who have some sort of a purpose, I think to a degree, life is always going to be a little bit trying and difficult. And that's why in the New Testament, it talks about men of whom the world was not worthy. And there were men and women who were sawn in half and who lived short lives and who never got the credit that was due and who were mocked and ridiculed. The prophets were murdered by their own people. And so we have to find a different way of measuring success. And unfortunately, we live in a society with social media that we measure success by how many followers, how many likes. And that is not the way to measure whether or not you are in the favor of the Lord. A lot of us, we enter heaven with many bruises and scars, but that is who the Purple Hearts and the Silver Stars get handed out to at the end of a war. So we've got to stop looking at this like how many people like and follow us, because they hated him and they will hate you too.
Can I just ask you how you beat having these attacks? I know you said you're still dealing with a different type of uh, danger now, but how did you beat the sleep paralysis?
Yeah. For me, and again, this falls right in line with what we've been talking about. My mother passed away when I was 40 years old. And I just think the enemy had been waiting for a prime time of vulnerability in my life. And when my mom died and it came back, hold on, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I lost you for a second.
Okay. Okay, yep. My sleep paralysis came back and it was more intense than it had ever been when I was young. And things were manifesting and I was seeing things moving under my covers and stuff that if I told you, you'd be like, okay, I couldn't even tell anyone, or I would have been put in a straitjacket. I mean, it was so intense. And I think that there was some witchcraft involved in my life at that point too. I think he sent people into my life that were posing as very godly friends that I now see. I just walked right into that one. Again, my people perish for lack of knowledge. If we got to know what's out there, or we can be so vulnerable. But anyway, I reached a point where kind of every single thing got thrown at me, and I went through a massive dark night of the soul, like I have never been through in my entire life. And really, my mom's death was probably the most insignificant piece of it. It became bigger than me, and it became bigger than what I could handle. And for the first time in my life, I realized I can't talk my way out of this. I can't pray my way out of this. I can't theologize myself out of this. I can't detach control this. And I was down for the count for a good 5 years. I was mentally, physically down for the count. I didn't go apostate or anything, but I could.
They've started playing with the technology now. Okay, guys. So we talked earlier, and when we said about the powers that be might not like what we're talking about, and they might get involved, and it seems that they did. Because for whatever reason, the audio just went crazy. No idea why. But we're back, and we're going to finish this show off. Where was we? Oh no!
No,
You've got
no, no,
Oh, you're back. You're back now. You're back.
no, no, we're gonna do this.
Okay.
Man, they don't want me to testify. I'm about to testify.
You was about to testify, and they stopped it.
So you had asked me how I finally got rid of it.
Yes.
And I was basically telling you that I had to literally go to hell and back to fix it, because um, I just had this 5-year dark night of the soul. I was absolutely to the end of myself. There's nothing I could have done at that point to have pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. And I really didn't know if I would ever recover out of it. And long story short, I remember one day just in desperation crying out to God and just saying, like, I just want this to be over. I mean, I've already done these like 20-year long trials, like with all the surgeries, and like I can't do this again. I just want this to be over. And this is how desperate I got, Tommy. I actually went online and searched. This is hard to admit, but I want other people out there who are in the same situation to know. I actually searched if there were medical procedures where they could go into my brain and take out memories and like let me forget like a year of my life. And interestingly, I found an article, not even written by a Christian, and they were talking about the absolute necessity of remembering our hardships and how they form who we are. And I was like, okay. And so I submitted myself before God and I said, God, I do not like where you have me. I don't understand why 85% of my life has been hardship and trauma and trial. I've proven to you over and over and over again, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to betray you. I'll endure it. Why do I have to keep proving this to you? But I submit to this torment, this sadness, this grief, this rejection, this abandonment. And I don't mean that on behalf of my mother, but all the people that kind of went afterwards. And um, I didn't hear an audible voice. But through my prayer and through some of the things that he was leading me to and the things that I was journaling, I very distinctly felt like the Father told me, Vicki, there's a couple of problems. One, you just want me to fix the last 6 months, mom dying and the aftermath. I want to fix everything going back to the womb. And we are going to fix it, but it's going to take a long time. And that was so distressing to me. But what he revealed to me in those 5 years is that I had lifelong chronic depression and anxiety. And some of that didn't come into play until my mom died, because she sort of sustained me through a lot of it. She could talk me off the ledge. And so when she was gone, that came into play. He miraculously, overnight, in an instant, took away the depression. And the way I describe it to people is, I don't think I could have ever told you for 40 years that I had depression. But when I didn't have it, I knew.
Yeah.
It was like a weight lifted off. I could get up out of bed in the morning and I could hear the birds chirping outside of the window. I hadn't heard birds in 20 years. And it wasn't that they weren't there. I had racing thoughts, and I had to work on the anxiety. That's what took the 5 years. I really had to learn how to take thoughts captive and how to forgive. And the Lord revealed to me, Vicki, I understand your anxiety. I understand the hardships you've been through, and anyone would be anxious. I'm merciful to that, but it is a sin. And so I had to let go of that. And I had to confess that the way I was handling my life was, it's almost like I didn't feel normal unless I was worried over something, and it had to be every little thing. And so it was a really long, arduous process. And it was really through submitting to God and being willing to go through the really hard work, because we always have an easy, quick fix. There's medication out there where I could have felt good instantly. And I was very tempted because I knew it would work and I knew it would provide a temporary relief. But I really felt like God was saying, I want to fix you. And if you become dependent on or addicted to something during the healing process and you get to a place of healing, then you've got this whole other problem you got to deal with.
Yeah.
And I had
Oh, lost you again.
All right. Am I
Oh,
back?
you're back. You're back.
Okay.
Oh.
Yep. I know. I know. Sometimes when I get the pop-up menus, I know that
Yeah.
I'll come back. So,
Yeah.
I had never been a drinker in my life. I never partied, uh, probably because so much of drinking is social, and I was so antisocial in my school years and stuff. And I went to a Bible college, and it wasn't a party school, and so I never drank. And at this point, when my mom died, I was 40 years old, and I never understood why people drank. Like it didn't make sense to me why people would. And it wasn't until my whole life kind of came crashing down that I realized, oh, now I get it. Now I understand. Because if you can forget it for a minute and
Yeah.
you can feel good, even if it's just a mirage, like I understood it. And I remember one day, this was the turning point. Um, and I'll just give you the abbreviated version, but there was one day that I I lost it and something triggered it. And I got home, and I'm not a real emotional creature. I'm not melodramatic. I'm not into fits. I don't raise my voice and scream and yell. And I don't really even tend to cry a lot. And so this 5 year period of grief for me was very exhausting because I was expending so much emotional energy every day. And every 2 seconds I couldn't find my keys, and then I'm sobbing, and like I was such a mess. But anyway, I got home, and I was so beside myself that I took a pillow and I threw myself on the floor and I shoved the pillow in my mouth and I screaming on the top of my lungs. And as I'm doing it, I'm scared this level of out of control emotion out of me before. And I couldn't stop screaming. And the still small voice in my head said, oh, I'm skipping a part. I decided that if I went to a liquor store and went and got completely smashed, I could just solve my problem. And I stopped screaming and I was just up on my elbows on the carpet, just thinking it through. And then I thought, what if it doesn't work? And what if I fall asleep, but then I wake up at 10 p.m. and then I'm stuck here again, but with the headache. And then I'm going to have to do it again tomorrow. And so I'm thinking the whole thing through and realizing this isn't going to work. This isn't going to be a good solution.
Yeah.
At that point, I heard in my head, I just heard a thought came through my head that I think was the Lord. And the thought was, choose life or death. And I was like, whoa. And so I thought in my head, and I had to think about it. I didn't say it right away. I said life. Because I knew what he was saying is if I took that path, it'd be a slow death, but that's what it would lead to. So in
Yeah.
my mind, I said life. I said life. And then I heard the thought in my head say it out loud. And so I said, life. And then the thought in my head said, say it louder. I said, life. And this continued until I had to stand up and I had to shout it. And I'm a stoic Scandinavian. We don't go around screaming and showing our emotions like that. Like that was just I was like embarrassed. And I'm in an apartment where people can hear me. And I I'm saying like life. I'm shouting this. And then I heard the Lord tell me, I want you, instead of screaming into your pillow in despair and defeat, I want you to scream on the top of your lungs, but it's a war cry that the enemy can hear because you're going to beat him. And I was so embarrassed. This was so outside my comfort zone that I went into my room and I went into my closet because I was like afraid the neighbors would hear and freak out. And it was very uncomfortable and very unnatural, but I did it. And I was just doing my whole like William Wallace, like, you know, I was like, going for it. And I don't have some little perfect bow on.
Like after that, I felt great. And no, I still had 5 years of torment and dark night ahead of me. And I had a lot of,
But I believe in that moment when it hung in the balances what I was going to do to solve this problem. And I was willing to take the longer more difficult route, the route that wasn't going to feel good, the route that wasn't going to have immediate gratification. And when I went into my closet and I belted out that war cry, I was declaring to the enemy that even if he had me under his boot, and even if I was under that boot for the short term, that not only was I going to rise up from this pit, but that I was going to rise up higher than I'd ever been before. And I was going to come into my calling and I was going to be victorious. You know, my mom.
Okay, we had another disturbance, so we're just going to try and round this off quickly because it's been a great show, but they don't want us to finish it for some reason.
Yeah, I'm encouraged. I was starting to think I was losing my touch, but
Nah, they've got us.
I was like, oh, good, I ticked them off. But anyway, that war cry for me, it didn't change my life in that moment, but it changed something behind the veil. And I did not feel God was close to me in those 5 years. I never felt so far away from him. I could barely connect with him in prayer, but I believed the word of God that said that he is near to the brokenhearted, to all those who are crushed in spirit. And I said, I'm crushed in spirit. So even though it doesn't feel like it, your word says that you're closer to me than you've ever been before. So I believe it. And so I just worked through those, muddied myself through those 5 years, just did the needful. But he, in that 5 years, got rid of bitterness and heartache, rejection issues. He healed my heart. My depression was gone. My anxiety was quelled. My sleep paralysis went away because the entryways, all of this crap I couldn't clean up in my life, the bitterness, the unforgiveness, the rejection, the self-loathing issues, the anxiety, the depression, these were all just revolving doors that made my heart open for attack. And so when I closed all those doors and had victory in those things, I shut off all the valves and they couldn't get to me that way before. And what I was saying right before they cut me off, and it's really interesting that this is where the tech went down, because I really didn't think it was that significant, but maybe it is. When I was born, my mom was going to name me Kelly. And when I was born and she saw that I had this birth defect, she renamed me Vicki Joy, because Vicki means victorious spirit and joy means joyful or full of joy. And those were two things that she wanted me to have. And interestingly, the two things that I have fought the hardest in my life to achieve is victory and joy. And I went by Vic my whole life. Everybody's always called me Vic, and my friends will call me Vic. And when I went through this process of deliverance and healing, I started going by Vicki Joy, because I said, I have earned this. I worked over 40 years for this. I had to go to hell and back for this. The enemy tried to steal this from me, and I'm claiming it. It's my name. So it was a lot of hard work, and it was difficult. It was lonely. It was frightening. But I had my dad here helping me, and I had the Lord helping me. So the good news is it's achievable. And the bad news is it is a lot of hard work. God could come down and bonk us over the head with a magic wand and make all our problems go away. But then we don't learn to grow, and we don't learn what we're capable of. So we've got to grit our teeth. We got to white knuckle it. We got to trust him, and we got to go through the hard stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. It's like, takes us back to what we was talking about right at the start. Vicki, super interesting. I've loved talking to you. I can't believe they've tried to stop our fun and get involved. They did. They've won. But we've had a great conversation, and you're welcome back on. You're welcome back on Let's Get Freaky anytime.
Oh man,
so thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I've had a blast chatting with you, and I'm glad our paths crossed. Great to know you.
Yeah, for sure. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is vickijoyanderson.com. That's Vicki with an I. You can also go to theyonlycomeoutAtnight.net, and you'll get all the information on my book and excerpts and things from the book and where to order it. I have other books on Amazon.com that you can find on my website. And you can also find me on Instagram, Vicki Joy Author.
Awesome. Vicki, thank you so much. We finished it. They didn't beat us.
We did it.
Hopefully the first of many conversations, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you.
Something's in your room. You can't move. You can't speak. It's a horrible, horrible feeling.
You know, you're looking out into the darkness and then you see a figure, but it's darker than the darkness.
I just get this like really creepy feeling, and I see this this like shadowy, demon-looking figure in the front seat of the car.
She used to come into my room at night and stand right by my bed, and I just was petrified.
I remember I saw something fly by my bedroom window. We heard the bathroom door shut. So then we looked out my bedroom window down the hallway, and the bathroom door was wide open.
So we came around the bend and we saw eye shine. This thing stood up. I mean, it stood up, and it had high pointed ears. It had a snout, had a long arm, and it grabbed the deer.